Hey guys, tonight we are stepping back, way back into a time shrouded in fear and uncertainty to imagine what secrets might be held within the hidden notebooks of those strange, often terrifying figures. The plague doctors. Close your eyes for a second. Can you picture it? The narrow cobblestone streets, usually bustling with the clamor of commerce and gossip, now eerily silent. The air hangs heavy, thick with the scent of smoke from countless bonfires meant to purify the air, mingled with something far fouler, something you can almost taste. The silence is punctuated only by the distant, mournful cry of someone in pain or the rattle of a cart carrying away the dead. It's a world turned upside down where trust has vanished and fear is the only constant companion. And right here in the heart of it all stands you. You've just taken on a job that feels less like a profession and more like a death sentence with benefits. Though honestly, the benefits package is terrible. You probably won't survive this. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, let me know where you're listening from and what time it is right now. It's always cool to see how far these stories travel. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You stand on the edge of the city you once knew, now a labyrinth of dread. The gatekeeper face swaddled in layers of cloth, despite the oppressive heat waves you threw, with a hasty, fearful gesture, recoiling slightly as you pass. His eyes visible above the mask hold a pity that chills you more than any February wind. You've arrived, your new post. Plague Doctor. The title feels too grand, too official for the knot of pure, unadulterated terror tightening in your gut. You are, after all, only recently trained, if you can call it training. A few hasty lectures on the prevailing medical theories, a grim demonstration of how to handle the dead, mostly involving not touching anything, and a strong recommendation to stay upwind. And here you are, the designated expert, armed with, well, not much more than hope, and a truly peculiar outfit you haven't quite figured out how to wear comfortably yet. The air inside the walls is thick, not just with smoke and decay, but with an almost palpable despair. It presses in on you from all sides. Shops are boarded up, windows are shuttered, and the few people you see dart like frightened mice from doorway to doorway, their faces pale with a mix of fear and suspicion. They eye your approaching figure even without the full getup with a wary apprehension. You are, after all, coming towards Hums. The sickness not running away like any sensible person. You are a walking, talking, if slightly terrified symbol of the pestilence itself, necessary but reviled. It's a strange feeling being feared and desperately needed at the same time. Kind of like a dentist with a drill, but you know, with a significantly higher mortality rate for everyone involved. Your instructions were simple if vague: tend to the sick, record your observations, and manage the dead. Manage the dead. The phrase echoes in your head. It sounds so administrative, like managing inventory, but you know what it means. Piles, carts, unmarked pits. It's a grim form of logistics you never signed up for. You were meant to be a healer, perhaps a respected physician one day, debating the merits of bleeding versus purgatives with colleagues in a warm, well-lit study. Instead, you are a glorified undertaker in training, assigned to the worst possible beat. You make your way to the temporary city council office, set up in a hastily disinfected guild hall. The officials inside look haggard, their faces drawn tight with sleepless nights and impossible decisions. They brief you quickly, handing you a list of addresses, your first calls. The paper feels heavy in your hand, each name a potential tragedy, each address a risk. They also give you a small leather-bound notebook and a stub of charcoal. Record everything, the lead official says, his voice raspy. Observations, symptoms, treatments, attempted outcomes. Everything. This knowledge must be preserved for when this is over. When this is over. It sounds like a fairy tale they tell themselves to keep going. You clutch the notebook. It's surprisingly sturdy, good quality paper, maybe parchment. Something meant to last. This isn't just scratch paper. This is meant to be a permanent record. A hidden record, perhaps, given the sensitivity of the information and the general panic. Maybe something you keep tucked away, not something you leave lying around for frightened neighbors to peek into. The idea of recording everything feels both overwhelming and strangely grounding. Amidst the chaos, you can create order, a written account of the unfolding nightmare. This is where the story truly begins, not just the city story, but your story etched onto these pages. Stepping back outside the weight of the notebook feels less like a burden and more like a purpose. You have to see, you have to document. Even if you can do little else to help the dying, you can bear witness. And maybe your observations could help someone somewhere someday understand what is happening or what happened. The thought is cold comfort against the wave of nausea that hits you as a particularly foul gust of wind sweeps down the street. Your first address is in the Weaver's Quarter. You know this part of town. Usually it's a hive of activity looms, clacking voices calling out the scent of wool and dye in the air. Now it's silent. The only movement is a few flies buzzing lethally around something you try very hard not to look at, lying slumped in a doorway. You pull your cloak tighter around you, though you know it offers no protection. You haven't put on the full gear yet. The officials told you it might cause undue panic if you walk through the streets looking like a walking raven from a nightmare. They said the full attire was for entering the homes for direct contact. Direct contact. Another phrase that makes your stomach churn. As you walk, you start to notice the smaller details the general terror had masked. A child's doll lying discarded in the gutter, its painted smile mocking the surrounding misery. A small wilted flower growing bravely from a crack in the paving stones. The way the sunlight, when it breaks through the smoke, casts long, eerie shadows that seem to stretch and writhe. You see graffiti scrawled on a wall. Pestilence is God's wrath. A common belief, certainly. Yet it was a mainstream historical fact that many people in the Middle Ages and Renaissance believed the plague was a divine punishment. It was a terrifying and often paralyzing explanation for an incomprehensible horror. But you, clutching your notebook, are looking for something less divine and more biological. You need facts, symptoms, observations, not sermons. You pass a small church as doors shut tight. No bells ring. Even prayer seems to have taken a hiatus. You wonder about the priests, the monks. Are they ministering to the sick, or are they too hiding away, hoping for divine intervention that seems increasingly unlikely to arrive in time? It feels like the entire structure of society is fraying at the edges, the threads snapping one by one. The rules you live by, the norms you understood, they're dissolving in the face of this invisible enemy. Approaching the Weaver's house, you steel yourself. This is it. The first official entry in the notebook. The first confrontation with the reality of your new life. You can hear a low moaning from inside. Your hand trembles slightly as you reach for the door. What will you write? Patient X, residence Y, symptoms moaning. It seems inadequate. You need to observe to look for specifics. The officials mention swellings, fever, dark spots. You have to look for those. You push the door open. The air inside is stifling, heavy with the smell of sickness and fear. The light is dim, filtered through closed shutters. In a corner, huddled on a straw mattress, is a figure writhing slightly. A woman, you think. Her skin looks flushed, but in the poor light it's hard to tell. You take a hesitant step inside the floorboards, creaking loudly in the silence. This is where the notebook comes in. It's not just a ledger, it's a shield, a way to focus your fear into something concrete, something useful. You can hide behind the act of observation, the clinical detachment that your training, however brief, tried to instill. You pull out the notebook and charcoal. You have to note the date, the time, the address, the basics, then the observation. What do you see? What do you hear? What do you smell? Try not to gag, you tell yourself. You approach the mattress slowly. The woman's eyes are open but unfocused. She mutters something you can't understand. You can see the swellings now. Under her arm and her groin, dark, angry lumps, buboes. The name itself sounds like a death knell. This is what they told you about. You force yourself to look closer despite the revulsion. Are they hard, soft? What color are they? You have to write it down. You crouch down, keeping a careful distance. Your heart is pounding. This is real. This isn't a theoretical lecture anymore. This is the plague right here in front of you. The sheer overwhelming presence of the disease is terrifying, and you are meant to do something. But what your limited knowledge feels utterly useless. Bleeding, it seems barbaric now. Poultices. What good would a poultice do against this? You look down at the notebook. Patient 1. You scrawl your hand shaking. Address Weaver's house, Copper Lane. Then symptoms: fever appears high, delirium. Large swellings, buboes present in, you pause, steeling yourself again, axilla and groin. You draw a shaky little diagram next to it, trying to represent the location of the swellings. It feels incredibly inadequate, like trying to map a hurricane with a child's crayon. You try to ask the woman questions gently. How long has she been sick? Does it hurt? Does anything make it better? She just moans or mutters incoherently. You can't get any useful information. This is another problem. How do you treat someone or even document their illness properly if you can't communicate? You make a note. Communication with patient, difficult, impossible. You remember something a more experienced and now likely dead physician mentioned? Looking at the urine, the color, the consistency. It was a common diagnostic tool based on humoral theory. You look around the small, squalid room. No chamber pot in sight, or if there is, you are not about to go searching for it. Another useless piece of knowledge in this situation. You stand up feeling a wave of helplessness wash over you. You can't do anything for her. There are no medicines, you have no cures you know of that could possibly combat this. Your role, you realize with a sickening certainty, is not to heal. It is to document, to catalog the dying, and perhaps to offer some small comfort, though even that feels like a lie when you are dressed as a harbinger of doom and can offer no hope. You add another note to the page. Treatment attempted, none possible at this time. Patient condition severe. It feels brutally honest and utterly soul-crushing to write down your own impotence. This is your job now, bearing witness to suffering you cannot alleviate. As you stand there, the silence of the room presses in. You can almost hear the frantic scratching of rats in the walls, another constant, terrifying presence in this city. You think about the quirky things you've heard people doing to try and ward off the plague. Wearing bags of strong-smelling herbs around their necks, you'll get to try that out soon enough, you suppose. Avoiding looking at sick people directly as if the disease could be caught through the eyes. One rather strange tidbit you heard was that some people were advised to sit between two fires, one on each side, believing the extreme heat and smoke would purify their personal air bubble. A quirky or fringe tidbit from the period's beliefs was the idea of fumigating oneself with intense heat or smoke as a preventative measure. It sounds absolutely bonkers and probably just resulted in a lot of sweaty, smoky, still infected people. But in times like these, people will try anything. You spend a few more moments in the room observing the woman's shallow breathing, the dark mottling beginning to appear on her skin, petechiae, another grim sign. You make careful notes trying to capture the details, forcing yourself to look to record. This notebook is becoming your anchor in the storm. It's something solid in a world that has melted into terror. It's a place to put the horrors you are witnessing, to contain them, perhaps within the confines of the written word. Leaving the Weaver's house is like stepping from one nightmare into another. The air outside feels different, tainted. You want to wash your hands, your face, everything, but there's nowhere safe to do it. You just have to keep going. The list of addresses is long. As you walk to the next house, you think about the role you're playing. Are you helping, or are you just a necessary evil, a way for the authorities to keep track of the disaster? Historians still argue whether the plague doctors, in their official capacity, truly helped slow the spread of the disease, or were primarily record keepers and symbols of the city's response. Their medical interventions were often useless or even harmful by modern standards. But perhaps their presence, their documentation, and their role in managing the dead, however grim, provided some structure in a chaotic world. You certainly hope you're doing something useful beyond just filling pages in this notebook. The next address is a merchant's house. Likely wealthier, perhaps cleaner than the Weaver's home, but the plague doesn't seem to discriminate much based on income. You brace yourself again, notebook ready. The fear hasn't subsided. You're just getting better at ignoring it, at pushing it down into that dark, tight knot in your gut. Your focus has narrowed to the task: observe, record, move on. The notebook is a silent companion, a witness to the unfolding catastrophe through your eyes. It's filling up already, just the first page, and there are so many more names on the list, so many more houses to visit, so many more observations to make etching the reality of the plague. one agonizing detail at a time, into the hidden history captured within these pages. You're still walking towards the merchant's house, the address heavy in your hand, the images from the weaver's home seared into your mind. The initial walk through the silent streets felt exposed, vulnerable. Now, with the next visit looming, you realize you need the gear. The officials gave it to you this morning. A bundle wrapped in heavy cloth, smelling faintly of wax and something herbal. It feels like putting on armor, though you suspect it's less about protection and more about presentation, or maybe just containing whatever horrors you'll inevitably pick up. You find a relatively secluded alleyway away from the main street and decide this is the place to transform yourself. Unwrapping the bundle, the fabric is thick, coarse, probably linen or canvas treated with wax or oil to make it resistant to whatever wet unpleasantness might be involved in your job. The suit consists of loose trousers tucked into boots, a coat that reaches your ankles, and gloves. All in the same somber, often dark color. It's designed to cover you completely. You pull on the trousers. They feel stiff and hot immediately. The boots are heavy, clunky. Then the coat. It's voluminous, designed to keep everything inside you away from the outside world and vice versa, according to the prevailing theories. As you fasten the toggles, you feel the weight of it settling on your shoulders. It's not comfortable. It restricts your movement, makes you feel clumsy. Then come the accessories. A wide-brimmed hat meant to indicate your profession from a distance, but also supposedly to provide some shade and keep things from dropping onto your head. You pull it on, it makes you feel even more enclosed. And finally, the piece de resistance, the thing everyone pictures when they think of a plague doctor, the mask. You hold it in your hands for a moment. It's made of leather fitted with glass eye holes and dominates by the long curved beak. The beak isn't just for show, it's stuffed with aromatic substances, dried flowers, herbs like mint, and camphor spices like cloves. The idea is that these pleasant, strong smells would filter the corrupted air, the miasma, preventing the bad air from entering your lungs and infecting you. It's basically a very elaborate, very medieval air freshener for your face combined with a filter made of potpourri. You take a deep breath before putting it on, trying to savor the relatively, though still smoky and foul, open air. Putting the mask on is a process. Straps buckle around your head, pulling the leather tight. The glass eye holes narrow your vision significantly, creating a tunnel effect. The leather presses against your cheeks and forehead. And then there's the smell. The herbs and spices inside the beak are overwhelmingly strong, stinging your nostrils. It makes it difficult to breathe normally. You have to inhale deeply to draw air past the aromatic barrier. It's hot inside the mask, and you know it's going to get much hotter very quickly. You stand up fully suited. You feel different. You look down at your gloved hands, the heavy fabric covering your body. You can't see your feet clearly. The world is muted, seen through two small panes of glass. The smells of the city replaced by a pungent herbal cloud. You are no longer just a person, a nervous young doctor. You are the plague doctor, a walking, breathing, but strangely inhuman figure. Stepping out of the alley, the reaction is immediate. People who were cautiously moving along the street suddenly freeze, their eyes wide with fear fixed on your figure. They scatter, pulling children close, darting into doorways, pressing themselves against walls to give you as wide a berth as possible. You see hands making hurried signs of the cross. It's a powerful, unsettling feeling. To be a pariah, a symbol of the very thing people are terrified of simply because of how you're dressed. Your protective gear makes you a target for fear of visual representation of the death that stalks their city. This outfit isn't just functional, questionably so, it's deeply symbolic. You are death's messenger, the one who comes when hope is gone. You are a necessary evil required by the authorities, but shunned by the populace. It's isolating. Before, people avoided you out of general fear of the disease. Now they avoid the suit. You are anonymous within it, a mere functionary. It strips away your individuality, replacing it with the terrifying persona of the plague doctor. It's like wearing a uniform that tells everyone you're here because someone is dying or already dead. Talk about a mood killer at a party, right? The design of this specific costume with its bird-like mask wasn't universal across all plague outbreaks or regions, but it was a mainstream historical fact that the iconic protective suit with the beaked mask was popularized in the 17th century by Charles Delorme, chief physician to Louis XIII. His version aimed to provide a complete physical barrier against the bad air, or miasma, which was the dominant theory of disease transmission at the time. They didn't understand germs, but they understood something was in the air. Inside the mask, the smell of herbs is starting to make your eyes water. It's hard to get a proper sense of the outside world's sense, which is probably the point, but it also makes you feel disconnected. Your own breathing sounds loud inside the leather confines. You try taking a deeper breath, hoping the herbs will invigorate you, as some believed. They just make you feel slightly nauseous. As you continue towards the merchant's house, you carry the stick you were given. It's not a walking stick, it's for poking things. Or rather for examining patients without touching them, for moving clothing, or for pointing things out to assistants if you had any. It adds to the weird bird-like appearance, a long beak and now a long stick. You feel like a strange, morbid stork. You could also use it to keep people away from you, you suppose reinforcing that social distance the outfit already creates. You heard a strange story, a quirky little detail about things people added to their protective ensembles. Beyond the standard herbs in the beak, some doctors would reportedly sew specific prayers or religious amulets into the lining of their masks or robes, believing that spiritual protection was just as vital as the physical barrier. A quirky or fringe tidbit was the practice of incorporating religious texts or charms directly into the plague doctor's protective gear for added spiritual defense against the pestilence. It highlights the blend of nascent medical theory and deep-seated superstition prevalent at the time. It makes a strange kind of sense. If you think demons or divine wrath are involved, maybe a little holy writing or a lucky rabbit's foot tucked into your pointy nose couldn't hurt, right? Probably wrong, but hey, desperate times. You reach the merchant's house. It looks imposing, even in its shuttered state. Knocking on the door feels alien, with a gloved hand, the sound muted. The silence from within is unnerving. You knock again harder this time using the end of your stick. Finally, the door creaks open a crack, revealing a pair of terrified eyes. The person inside hesitates, then opens the door just enough for you to slip through. As you step inside the heavy door closing behind you, you hear the latch click shut. You are enclosed again, this time within the house, the air inside stagnant and thick with the smell of sickness, only slightly masked by the herbs in your beak. Your muffled footsteps echo slightly. The people inside recoil as you enter, fully, even though they called for you. The fear is palpable. You are here to document, to observe, to perhaps offer some small, likely useless intervention. And you are doing it wrapped in this strange, isolating costume. You pull out your notebook. Holding the charcoal feels awkward with the thick gloves. The small world seen through your glass eye holes is now dominated by the dim light filtering into the merchant's home and the scared faces of the family members standing well back from you. The notebook suddenly feels different too. It's no longer just your personal record. It's the record of the anonymous figure in the suit. What you write feels less like your own thoughts and more like the official grim observations of the city's plague doctor. The outfit enforces that detachment for better or worse. You have a job to do, and this uniform, however uncomfortable, is how you do it. You look around the room trying to spot the sick person. The low light combined with the restricted vision of the mask makes it difficult. You rely more on sound, on smell, what you can detect through the herbs, on the hushed whispers and pointed gestures of the family members. Your stick is extended, slightly ready to prod or point. Thinking about the effectiveness of this whole getup, historians still argue whether the full plague doctor's costume offered any significant practical protection against the bubonic plague, given that transmission is primarily bacterial via fleas or airborne in pneumonic cases. While the heavy material might have offered some barrier against fleas and the mask herbs, might have filtered large particles, or just smelled nice, it certainly wasn't the germ-proof barrier needed. Its primary effect might have been psychological, both terrifying the public and perhaps giving the doctor a needed sense of being protected, however false. It was a symbol of the struggle, a visible presence grappling with the invisible enemy, even if that struggle was often futile. You adjust the mask slightly, trying to get more comfortable, a futile effort. You need to focus. There's a figure lying on a bed in the corner. You move towards them, your heavy robe swishing quietly, the only sound besides your own muffled breathing and the distant, terrified whimpers of the family. Notebook-ready charcoal clutched in your glove. You prepare to make your next entry, an anonymous figure, recording another tragedy in a world where death wears a beak. You move towards the bed, your heavy robe whispering on the floorboards. The dim light filtering through the shuttered windows does little to illuminate the scene. It feels like walking through perpetual twilight. Your restricted vision through the glass eye holes of your mask makes the room seem even smaller, the shadows deeper and more menacing. The air inside the house is thick and heavy, a cloying mixture of stale breath sickness and the desperate underlying scent of fear. The strong herbal aroma from your mask fills your nose, pushing back the worst of the stench, but not entirely masking it. It's like trying to cover up a dumpster fire with a bouquet of potpourri. You get the idea, but it's still a dumpster fire underneath. The family members huddle in the corner, farthest from the bed, and from you, their faces pale and drawn eyes wide with a mixture of terror and desperate hope. Their hushed whispers are almost inaudible through the leather of your mask, just a low, fearful murmur. You point your stick towards the bed, a long extension of your gloved arm, a physical and symbolic barrier between you and the potential contagion. On the bed lies a figure mostly covered by a blanket, but you can see the rise and fall of shallow breaths. Their faces turned away, slightly pale and glistening with sweat. You approach slowly, using the stick to gently nudge aside a discarded cloth near the bed. It feels clinical, detached, a necessary dehumanization to get through the task. You are here to assess, to record. Using the end of your stick, you carefully lift a corner of the blanket. The sight beneath is grim, though sadly familiar by now. Discolored skin, perhaps purplish or dark red blotches, and the unmistakable swelling. A mainstream historical fact is that the appearance of buboes, swollen, painful lymph nodes, often in the groin, armpits, or neck, was a primary, terrifying diagnostic sign of the bubonic plague. You use your stick to indicate the location and size of the swelling, noting its characteristics from a safe distance. You prod gently with the stick's tip, trying to gauge the firmness or tenderness, though the thick gloves make interpreting the tactile feedback through the stick difficult. It's a ridiculous pantomime, really, but it's what you were trained to do, what the city requires you to document. Poke prod note, the pinnacle of medieval medical examination. Everyone, don't all rush at once for this cutting-edge diagnostic technique. You need to record this. You fumble in your robe pocket for your notebook, the leather strangely smooth under your thick glove. Extracting it is awkward, requiring more dexterity than the gloves allow. You finally get it out along with the piece of charcoal you use for writing. Opening the book with gloved hands is another small battle. The pages are delicate, and the gloves are anything but. You manage to pry it open to a fresh page. Holding the charcoal feels clumsy, like trying to draw with a sausage. The act of writing, usually fluid and automatic, becomes a slow, deliberate process. You lean against a wall or a piece of furniture, trying to find a stable surface to write on the stick tucked under your arm or held awkwardly in your other hand. You try to keep your writing neat despite the difficulty, the charcoal scratching softly against the rough paper. You record the date, the address, the name of the household head if you know it, and then the observations about the sick person. The location of the buboes, any other visible symptoms like rashes or discoloration, the apparent state of consciousness or fever. The mask is getting hotter now, your breath misting the inside of the glass eye holes slightly. You shift on your feet, the heavy boots feeling like lead weights. The silence in the room is broken only by the sick person's labored breathing and your own muffled inhalations. You can feel the eyes of the family on you, a tangible weight of fear and despair. You are their last hope, their required official visitor, and they know, everyone knows that there is very little you can actually do. It's a job that involves a lot of showing up and writing things down while everyone holds their breath, literally and figuratively. You lean closer to the sick person, maintaining distance with the stick, trying to get a better look at their eyes, their mouth, any other signs. The smell of sickness is stronger here, even through the herbs. You make a note about the patient's general condition: weak, feverish, unresponsive. You try to listen to their breathing, but the mask muffles external sounds too much. It's frustratingly isolating, even when you're in a room full of people and standing right next to your subject. As you write, you recall some of the desperate, often bizarre things people attempt to cure the plague in their homes before calling for a doctor, or perhaps alongside their official visit. A quirky or fringe tidbit was the use of strange plasters or poultices applied directly to the buboes, often made from mixtures that sound utterly repulsive to modern ears, such as dried toad, human or animal excrement, or various concoctions of herbs and animal fats. The idea was to draw out the poison or bad humors from the swelling. You haven't seen any obvious poultices on this patient yet, but you've encountered them in other homes, sticky, foul-smelling masses that likely did more harm than good. It makes you wonder about the things people try when faced with utter helplessness. You can almost respect the sheer inventiveness, even if it involves toads. You finish your notes for this patient, summarizing the key findings. You close the notebook awkwardly, tucking it back into your pocket. You glance at the family in the corner. What do you tell them? There's no cure you can offer. You can advise isolation, perhaps recommend some herbs or practices that might offer comfort, but won't fight the bacteria. Your words are usually few, and delivered through the mask, they sound even more detached and impersonal. Keep them warm. Provide fluids if they can take them. Pray. Not exactly a miracle cure, is it? It feels hollow. You step back from the bed, the stick still extended. The family watches your every move. You need to record other details, maybe the number of people in the household, their general health status, though you can only guess based on observation any other potential cases in the house. You might use the stick to point to different people, asking simple, direct questions that require minimal response. Thinking about the value of these notes you are so painstakingly recording, laboring with your clumsy gloves and charcoal, historians still argue whether the detailed records kept by plague doctors were primarily useful for understanding the disease itself, or if they served more as administrative documents for city officials to track the spread and manage quarantine measures. Were you contributing to future medical knowledge or just providing data points for bureaucrats? Given the state of medical understanding, it's likely the latter, though the sheer volume of observations, however flawed, might have inadvertently preserved some patterns for later analysis. It's a thought to ponder as you scratch away in your book. Are you a scientist or just a very grim census taker? You make a few more notes about the household configuration. You try to gauge the level of fear, the resources available to the family. This isn't just about the sick person. It's about containing the disease within the house, within the district. Your visit isn't just medical. It's an official check-in on a quarantine unit. The city needs to know where the cases are concentrated. You can feel the sweat starting to trickle down your temples inside the mask. It's oppressive hot, and the constant strong smell of herbs is starting to give you a headache. You adjust the mask slightly, again a futile gesture. The sick person coughs, a rattling sound that makes the family flinch. You note it down. You've done what you can here. You've assessed the patient, recorded the details for the city's logs, and offered the standard inadequate advice. There's a sense of ritual to it, a performance of competence in the face of overwhelming impotence. You dip your head slightly towards the family, a gesture of acknowledgement, perhaps, or farewell. You turn and move towards the door, your boots heavy on the floor, the stick tapping lightly as you walk. The family remains huddled in the corner, watching you go, relief, perhaps mingling with continued despair, now that the official visitor has completed their grim duty. You reach the door, fumbling slightly with the latch with your gloved hand. You are ready to step back out into the smoky, fearful air of the street, leaving this house of sickness behind, heading towards the next address on your list, the next entry in your hidden notebook. You step back out into the street, pulling the heavy door closed behind you with a gloved hand. The latch clicks shut, sealing the house and its inhabitants away. The air outside feels different. Not necessarily cleaner, given the general state of urban hygiene, but less stifling, less saturated with the specific heavy scent of active illness. Still, the fear hangs in the air, like the perpetual wood smoke haze. You pull the hood of your robe tighter, adjusting the mask once more. You look up for a moment, your gaze sweeping across the street through the circular eye holes. Other doctors, perhaps, making their rounds, or just terrified citizens peeking from behind shuttered windows. It's hard to tell. Everyone looks like a potential threat or a potential victim. Your boots echo softly on the cobbled street as you begin the trek back to the office or the guild hall or whatever designated place the city requires you to report to. It's usually a building set apart, perhaps an old merchant's house requisitioned for the crisis, smelling faintly of vinegar and carbolic acid. The walk is slow, deliberate. The heavy oil-treated leather of your suit makes you feel cumbersome, insulated from the world, but also weighed down by it. People give you a wide berth as you pass, a mixture of respect, fear, and revulsion. You are a necessary evil, a walking symbol of the plague itself. You arrive at the designated building. The doors often guarded a figure in a simpler mask or just a cloth covering their face, armed with a spear or a club to keep the desperate or the curious away. You identify yourself and they nod, letting you pass. The air inside is cooler, maybe a little less thick than the street, but carries its own distinct smell. That sharp, vinegary scent intended to ward off contagion, mixed with the earthy smell of charcoal dust and the faint underlying odor of fear and exhaustion from the people who work here. The first task is always the ritual of disarming and disinfecting. There's a designated area, perhaps a courtyard or a large bare room. You begin the slow process of removing the layers. The heavy gloves first carefully peeled off, often sticking slightly to your hands. Then the boots. Finally, the heavy robe and the mask. Slipping the mask off is always a moment of relief, letting you breathe the slightly cleaner air, freely even if it's still heavy with disinfectant. Your face is usually sweaty, perhaps marked by the leather straps. The strong smell of the herbs from inside the mask lingers in your nostrils. You feel strangely vulnerable without the protective shell exposed despite being indoors. You lay your equipment out carefully. The stick, the gloves, the boots, the robe, the mask. There are basins of water often mixed with vinegar or other strong-smelling substances. You wash your gloved hands first, then the boots, the stick. The mask requires particular attention. You wipe down the leather surfaces, clean the glass eye holes. The robe is often brushed down, perhaps hung near a brazier of burning herbs, often juniper or rosemary, which were thought to purify the air in the garments. A mainstream historical fact is that fumigation and washing with vinegar or other astringent liquids were common if largely ineffective methods of disinfection practiced by plague doctors and others attempting to cleanse objects or air thought to carry the miasma of the disease. It felt like you were doing something anyway, a bit like washing your car during a hurricane, probably not making a huge difference to the overall chaos, but it feels productive. While your gear is airing, you retrieve your notebook. This is often done away from the common area, maybe in a small private space if you're lucky, or just a quiet corner. You sit at a makeshift desk or a sturdy table, perhaps lit by a flickering candle or the weak light from a dusty window. You open your field notebook, the one you carried into the houses, the one with the charcoal notes scratched onto rough paper, and then you open another larger, more official-looking ledger. This is where the transfer happens. This is the interface between your grim observations and the city's records. You painstakingly copy the relevant details from your field notes into the official ledger. The address, the date, the number of sick in the household, the number of dead, perhaps a brief note on the severity of symptoms or the location of the buboes. You try to make the entries neat and legible using ink from a well, the scratch of the quill pen much finer and more precise than the blunt charcoal. It's tedious work, often repetitive, transferring the same bleak information day after day. Household A, X, sick Y, dead. Household BZ, 6-0 dead for now. Household C, it becomes a litany of suffering reduced to numbers and locations. This ledger is what goes to the city officials, the administrators desperately trying to track the spread, manage quarantines, arrange burials, and perhaps most importantly, count the dead. They need data for the grim bureaucracy of a city under siege by plague. But your small personal notebook contains more. It has the messy notes, the raw observations, the things you didn't think were necessary or appropriate for the official record. The side notes on desperate attempted cures. You saw the bizarre symptoms that didn't fit the standard descriptions, perhaps even personal reflections or sketches. This is the private record, the place where the clinical detachment sometimes falters, where the sheer weight of what you witness might leave a slightly more human mark. You might interact with a few colleagues who are also reporting back. Perhaps a shared nod, a brief, weary exchange. How was your circuit on Grim and yours? Not much needs to be said. You all see the same things. There might be a shared moment of dark humor, a joke about the smell or the absurdity of your elaborate outfits, or the latest ridiculous cure someone has heard about. Laughter is rare and often quickly stifled, a fragile thing in this environment. Then comes the interaction with the city official. They are usually seated behind a larger desk, poring over maps and lists their face, often pale and strained, though rarely venturing out into the infected areas themselves. You approach ledger in hand. They barely look up, nodding for you to place the book on the desk. They might ask a few curt questions. Any new districts affected? The total reported deaths today? Are the quarantines holding? Their focus is on the macro level, the statistics, the logistics of managing a dying city. Your reality of entering homes, seeing suffering up close, is abstracted into their charts and figures. It's a necessary part of the job, this administrative interface, but it feels distant from the actual work you just performed. It's like being a battlefield medic and then having to report your patient numbers to a logistics officer who only cares about supply chain efficiency. As you sit there copying, you can't help but think about the vast amount of suffering these simple entries represent. Each line isn't just a number, it's a family destroyed, a life extinguished. And your notes, even in the official ledger, are just snapshots. They don't capture the sounds, the smells, the palpable fear, the desperate pleas. They don't capture the ineffective poultices or the whispered prayers. Historians still argue whether the official plague records compiled from doctors' notes accurately reflected the true scale and nature of the epidemic, or if they were inherently incomplete or biased due to the challenges of data collection during a crisis and the administrative focus. Sure, were the numbers underreported? Were certain types of cases missed? Were the details that mattered for understanding the disease often left out in favor of just tracking location and mortality? You sign your entry, a tiny mark of accountability in a sea of death. You might overhear snippets of conversation between officials about supplies or burials, or the need for more guards. It's a machine, the city's response clunking along in the face of an unstoppable force. Your role is a small cog in that machine, gathering the data needed to keep it running, however poorly. You finish copying your notes, closing the official ledger. You retrieve your personal notebook, tucking it securely away again. It feels lighter now that the crucial data has been transferred, but it still holds the more granular details, the less clinical observations. It's the place where you might write down that peculiar rash you saw, or the fact that one family seemed to be trying some strange cure involving ground gemstones, or just a note about the sheer terror in a child's eyes. Things that don't fit neatly into the official checkboxes, but which paint a fuller, albeit grimmer picture of what you experienced. A quirky or fringe tidbit is that some plague doctors' personal notes or later accounts sometimes mention these popular home remedies, often with a mix of skepticism and perhaps morbid fascination, detailing ingredients that range from common herbs to truly bizarre and dangerous concoctions. You make a mental note to perhaps expand on some of those observations later, when you have more privacy, if you have the energy. You gather your cleaned gear. The leather of the mask and robe feels stiff, still slightly damp from washing or infused with the herbal smoke. The boots are heavy. You pull them back on the sense of re-encapsulating yourself returning. You are putting the armor back on before stepping back out into the world. You nod to the official, who might nod back or might already be deep in conversation with someone else oblivious to your departure. Your duty here is done for now. The recording is complete, the data delivered. You are ready to face the street again? Maybe another call, another house, another entry waiting to be made in your notebooks. Both the official one and the private one, you keep hidden beneath your layers of leather and fear. You step back out of the requisition building, the weighted sense of official duty lifted at least for a moment. The street still holds its breath, still offers that strange mix of unsettling quiet and sudden jarring noise. A distant cart rumbling, a shutter banging in the wind, a sudden cough that makes everyone freeze. You pull your hood back up, adjusting the mask again. The faint smell of the herbs inside feels familiar now, almost comforting in its constant presence, even if it does make you feel a bit like a walking potpourri sachet. Finding a space for the personal notes is the next challenge. It requires a degree of privacy the administrative office often doesn't afford. Maybe you head to your own lodgings if they haven't been quarantined or are even still standing. Perhaps there's a quiet corner in the Physicians Guild Hall late at night. Or if necessary, even just a secluded spot in a less frequented park, the only sounds the rustle of leaves and the distant unsettling tolling of a church bell. You seek refuge from the public eye and the administrative gaze to engage with the true unvarnished reality you've been collecting. You find your spot. The light might be poor, maybe just a sliver from a window, or the faint glow of a street lamp filtering through thick air, or a carefully shielded candle if you're indoors. You settle yourself, the heavy layers of your suit feeling less like armor now, and more like a cumbersome second skin that needs to be shed, or at least loosened. You reach beneath the heavy robe, perhaps into a pouch sewn inside, or a satchel worn close to your body, and retrieve the other notebook. This isn't the large ledger-like book you presented to the officials. This one is smaller, perhaps bound in worn leather. Its pages may be rougher, less formal. It feels different in your hands. Lighter certainly, but carrying a heavier weight of personal observation and raw, unfiltered experience. This is the notebook that traveled with you into the homes, the one where you scratch notes in situ, often hastily perhaps with charcoal or a stub of pencil, the inkhorn too impractical for quick observations. It's the place where the clinical facade sometimes cracked, where the sheer humanness of the situation seeped in. It's messy, probably smudged, maybe even stained with God knows what. It's your private world, a parallel record to the official one, and arguably the more truthful one. A mainstream historical fact is that while official city records provide vital statistical data on plague outbreaks, the true granular experience is often pieced together from scattered private letters, diaries, and sometimes, if they survived and can be identified, the personal notes of individuals like doctors, priests, or administrators who witnessed the events firsthand. These private sources offer a depth that the official numbers can never convey. You open it carefully. The pages might crinkle slightly, releasing a faint, mingled scent of the herbs you carry stale air, and perhaps the underlying smell of the plague-ridden houses that clings to everything. You scan the hurried notes from the day, shorthand abbreviations, little diagrams. This is where you recorded things that didn't fit neatly into the official ledger's columns for sick, dead, and location. You might see a note like Patient X, bubo size of pigeon egg purple center, which is more detail than the official book needed, but which you noted because you were trying to understand the disease's progression. Or family Y, used ground pearl paste. No effect, a specific observation on an attempted remedy that the city didn't care about, but you found curious. The official ledger was for the what and the where and the how many. This notebook is for the how and the why and the what it felt like. It's where you could jot down a bizarre symptom you hadn't read about in the text, or a strange environmental detail about a house where everyone died, or the unsettling behavior of rats in a particular alley. Things that might be noise in the official data, but felt significant to you in the moment, part of the chaotic tapestry of the epidemic. You might sketch things here too. A quick diagram of the lymph nodes where buboes most commonly appeared, or a drawing of a particularly virulent-looking rash. Maybe even a rough depiction of a strange device someone was using to ward off the illness. It's visual note-taking, capturing details that words couldn't easily convey, or that you didn't have the time or privacy to fully articulate during your visits. It's like your own personal, extremely depressing Pinterest board, but instead of home decor ideas, it's all about lumps and death. One of the main things that populated these pages was the incredible array of attempted cures and preventative measures you encountered. The official records documented the deaths. These cures failed to prevent, but your notes captured the attempts themselves. You saw poultices made of fig and onion plasters, of dried toad concoctions involving human excrement. Yes, really powders made from precious stones, ground horn, or even supposedly magical charms. People were desperate, and desperation breeds creativity, unfortunately often mixed with superstition and pseudoscience. A quirky or fringe tidbit, sometimes found alluded to in personal accounts from plague times, are the truly bizarre and often dangerous remedies attempted by the populace, ranging from bleeding and purging to applying live chickens to buboes or drinking molten gold. Kimashiri. You might have jotted down a note about seeing someone trying to smoke out the plague with powerful noxious fumes, or attempting to ward it off by constantly smelling vinegar or powerful herbs. Practices you yourself engaged in, of course, but perhaps noting the variations or the sheer intensity with which some people pursued them. You might also use this space to record your developing thoughts or theories. Was the disease spread by bad air, miasma? By contagion from person to person? Was it a punishment from God? The scientific understanding of disease was nascent, and the plague was a terrifying, overwhelming puzzle. Your notes might contain tentative observations about how quickly illness spread in a crowded house versus a more isolated one, or whether people who handled the dead seemed to get sick faster. These weren't definitive conclusions, just observations, questions, little pieces of a puzzle you were trying to assemble in your mind, far away from the official narrative or prevailing theories. It was like being a detective with none of the right tools and half the clues missing, trying to solve a crime where the killer was invisible and everywhere. Another crucial element kept within these private pages was the human story, or as much of it as you dared record. The official ledger only cared about numbers. Your notebook might have a note about the wailing of a mother, or the stoicism of an old man, or the terror in a child's eyes. These weren't clinical observations, but the emotional resonance of the work. You couldn't write "witnessed profound despair" in the official record, but you could scribble something like "Family Z, silence louder than any scream." These small notes were perhaps a way of processing, of acknowledging the immense suffering you were witnessing without compromising the necessary professional distance you had to maintain in your public role. You might also use this space to record personal details that intersected with the crisis. Perhaps a note about a colleague who fell ill, or news heard about your own family or district. It's a record of the plague's encroachment into your own life, not just the lives of your patients. The line between professional duty and personal terror was constantly blurred, and this notebook was where that blurring might be reluctantly acknowledged. Think of it like this: the official ledger was the city's spreadsheet of death, functional and bleak. This notebook was your personal journal, the messy, honest, terrifying account of what it was like to be on the front lines. It held the details that made the numbers real, the sensory experiences, the flicker of emotion, the desperate attempts at understanding. It was less about facts for the administration and more about capturing a sliver of the overwhelming reality. It's where you might write down the description of the smell of death mixed with stale herbs, or the way the flies buzzed around open sores, or the sudden violent cough that ended a life. Details too gruesome, too specific, or too human for the official report. Reading through it now in the quiet solitude you found feels strange. It's a summary of your day, but told in a language only you truly understand. It brings back the sights, the sounds, the smells, the fear. It's a constant reminder of the work, even when you're trying to find a moment of respite. It's the weight of the world condensed onto paper slipped inside your robe. And it's something that, if found, might reveal more about your own thoughts, your fears, your tentative attempts at understanding than any official record ever could. Historians still argue whether these types of private accounts, if they survive the centuries and the risks of exposure and destruction, offer a more authentic window into the lived experience of the plague than official records, or if they are inherently biased by personal perspective, fear, and superstition. Were they just venting, or were they genuinely attempting proto-scientific observation? It's hard to say definitively from the scraps that remain. You might add a few more notes, now expanding on those charcoal jottings from earlier, filling in the gaps, adding the details you couldn't write down in the patient's house, describing the texture of a bubo, the color of a patient's skin, the specific plea they made before losing consciousness. It's a form of internal processing, making sense of the chaos by writing it down, classifying it, even if just for yourself. It's a way to try and impose order on something utterly without it. You dip your quill into a small pot of ink, the fine point feeling more deliberate than the blunt charcoal, and write in the dim light. The only sounds are the scratch of the quill and the beating of your own tired heart. You might finish by writing a brief, perhaps coded entry about your own state. Not, "I am terrified and exhausted," but something like, "Strength wanes," or "The air grows heavier." A personal check-in hidden amongst the medical observations and bizarre cure attempts. It's a moment of vulnerability captured on paper, tucked away from the world that demands you remain stoic and functional. Closing the notebook feels like closing a small, grim box of secrets. You tuck it back away deep inside your clothing, where it's safe from official eyes. It's a burden you carry, but also a necessary tool, a place to collect the data that the official system discards. The observations that might one day perhaps help someone understand this horror. Or maybe it's just a way to keep yourself sane, to make sense of the unending stream of suffering you witness every day. It's your personal archive of the apocalypse kept hidden from the light. You close the private notebook, the weight of its contents settling in your gut like a cold stone. Tucked safely away, it remains a hidden repository of truth, a stark counterpoint to the official records you contribute to. But reality isn't confined to paper, hidden or public. It's waiting outside, pressing in. Stepping back out into the city streets, the contrast is immediate and jarring. The quiet moments of reflection are over. You are thrust back into the maelstrom of the epidemic, where official pronouncements and desperate personal actions collide in a chaotic, often ineffective struggle against the unseen enemy. The city authorities, bless their bewildered hearts, are trying. They issue decrees, posting them on church doors or shouting them in empty squares to whoever might be listening. You see them occasionally, heralds looking harried and masked, their voices cracking as they read out the latest orders. These are the official measures, the public health directives based on the best or perhaps worst understanding available at the time. They sound rational, logical in theory. Quarantine, that's a big one. Families locked in their homes for 40 days. 40 giorni, the Italian term that gives us the word remember. You saw it in action in Section 3, didn't you? The boarded-up houses, the Red Cross daubed on the door, the chilling silence within. A mainstream historical fact is that quarantine, isolating the sick and those exposed, was one of the earliest and most widely implemented official public health measures against the plague across medieval and early modern Europe. Cities also tried to restrict travel, turning away outsiders, sometimes even building walls or ditches around their boundaries, trying to become islands in the sea of sickness. You might have encountered patrols at the city gates, nervous-looking guards waving you through because of your official status, but eyeing you with suspicion nonetheless. Then there are the sanitation orders. They sound sensible, don't they? Remove filth from the streets. Do not cast dead animals into the river. Cleanse your premises. The problem is the infrastructure for widespread sanitation is, well, let's just say it's not exactly modern. You're walking through streets that are frankly open sewers in many places. Despite the decrees, the practicalities of collecting and disposing of waste on a massive scale, especially with so many people sick or dead, are overwhelming. You see the piles of refuse, the stagnant water, the occasional dead rat lying ignored in a gutter. The air still carries that pervasive, unpleasant odor that no amount of burning herbs seems to fully dispel. Trying to enforce sanitation in a city buckling under the weight of death feels a bit like trying to bail out a sinking ship with a teacup while the storm rages. You also witness the attempts to deal with the dead. Burial pits are dug often hastily outside the city walls. Carts piled high with bodies rumble through the streets, driven by men who are often convicts or paid laborers draped in cloths, their faces grim and averted. The decrees say bodies should be buried quickly and deeply, perhaps sprinkled with lime. But again, the sheer volume is staggering. Graves or shallow pits overflow, and the carts can't keep up. The sight and the smell are constant reminders of the scale of the disaster, mocking the official orders for orderly disposal. Sometimes public officials order the burning of possessions from infected houses, clothing, bedding, furniture. You might see the smoke rising from bonfires in squares or at the edge of the city, carrying the faint, sickening smell of burning fabric and something else, something organic and awful. The idea is to destroy the source of the contagion, which unknowingly does align with modern understanding of germ theory destroying infected material. But it's often done haphazardly, incompletely, and it's hugely destructive to property, adding economic hardship to the suffering. People resent seeing their belongings go up in smoke, even if they understand on some level the necessity. You might pass a small crowd watching a pyre, their faces a mixture of fear, sorrow, and resentment. Then there are the religious and civic responses intertwined in the era's worldview. Processions wind through the streets, people carrying religious icons, chanting prayers, hoping to appease divine wrath. Churches are sometimes filled, sometimes empty, as fear keeps people away, creating a strange paradox. Bells toll incessantly sometimes to mark deaths, sometimes in the desperate hope that the sound itself might ward off the disease, a theory based on the idea that plague was caused by bad air, and loud noises might break it up. The air is thick, not only with the smell of sickness and smoke, but also with the constant mournful clang of bells and the murmur of hurried prayers. These are official responses in the sense that the church and civil authorities often organize them, but they are born more of spiritual desperation than practical public health strategy. The frustrating thing as you observe it is the limited impact these official measures seem to have. Despite the quarantines, the illness continues to spread. Despite the sanitation orders, the streets remain foul. Despite the prayers and bells, people continue to sicken and die in horrifying numbers. It's like trying to stop a flood with a sieve. There are logistical nightmares, lack of resources, and widespread non-compliance. People hide their sick relatives to avoid quarantine, fearing abandonment or starvation. They steal from abandoned houses. They ignore sanitation rules because, well, they always have. And now they're terrified and focused on immediate survival. And the fundamental lack of understanding about transmission means even well-intentioned efforts miss the mark entirely. You might see a city official proudly overseeing the burning of goods while standing downwind, completely unaware of the actual danger. But away from the official pronouncements and the cumbersome, often failing city efforts, there's another layer of response. The personal, the private, the truly bizarre world of folk medicine, superstition, and sheer unadulterated panic. This is where you see the fascinating, often tragic ingenuity of desperate people. While the officials are ordering quarantines, individuals are trying, well, you name it. You yourself carry herbs. Rue, wormwood, juniper, perhaps camphor or civet, if you can afford it, stuffed into the beak of your mask. The official justification might be to filter the bad air miasma, but you also know that strong smells are believed to ward off disease. You see this taken to extremes by others. People walking around with onions or garlic cloves held to their noses. Others constantly sniffing vials of vinegar, some light fragrant woods or spices in their homes. It's a pervasive belief that scent is key either to purify the air or repel the pestilence. You pass someone sitting on their doorstep holding a bouquet of flowers, their eyes wide with fear, clinging to the belief that the scent offers protection. Beyond the smells, there's an incredible range of physical preventions. Amulets worn around the neck or wrist inscribed with prayers, magical symbols, or the names of saints. Charms made of precious stones, supposedly possessing protective qualities. Carrying dried flowers, dried animal parts, a dried toad was a surprisingly popular choice. Perhaps you even noted one in your private journal, remember? Or bits of unicorn horn, usually narwhal tusk. But hey, same difference when you're facing oblivion. People try to avoid looking at the sick, believing the disease can enter through the eyes. They cross the street to avoid someone who coughs. They wear layers of clothing not just for warmth, but as a physical barrier against the noxious air. And then there are the internal remedies, things people ingest or apply. Eating strange diets, avoiding certain foods, or fasting entirely to purify the body. Drinking concoctions of herbs, wine vinegar, or even mercury, spoiler alert. Mercury is not a cure unless your goal is secondary poisoning. Applying poultices or plasters made of animal excrement, clay, or bizarre mixtures to the skin. A quirky or fringe tidbit, sometimes recorded in personal accounts and medical texts of the time, are preventative measures that involve deliberately exposing oneself to strong or unpleasant smells based on the miasma theory, including in extreme cases smelling cesspits or holding rags soaked in urine to the face, on the logic that one bad smell might drive out another. You might have seen someone doing this, clutching their urine-soaked rag, their face a mask of desperation and revulsion, a truly pathetic and terrifying sight. The theory behind many of these is based on the prevailing medical understanding of humors, balancing bodily fluids, or miasma, bad air, or simply ancient superstition and folklore. Bleeding and purging, making people vomit or defecate, were also common preventative treatments based on the idea of removing bad humors from the body. You might see someone who has clearly been bled looking pale and weak, hoping that losing some blood will save them from the plague. It's a world where the line between medical practice and outright quackery is incredibly blurred, and people will try anything to avoid the terrifying symptoms you see every day. You might encounter individuals practicing flagellation publicly, whipping themselves, or participating in flagellant processions. The belief here is that the plague is divine punishment for sin, and by mortifying the flesh, they can appease God's wrath and protect themselves and their community. The rhythmic thud of the whips, the chanting, the sight of bleeding backs. It's a disturbing, visceral spectacle that adds another layer to the city's soundscape of suffering. It's a desperate act of faith, a public performance of penance in the face of overwhelming, inexplicable death. Remember that note in your journal about the silence being louder than a scream? A flagellant procession is the opposite. Noise so loud it feels like it's trying to drown out the silence of the dead. And then there are the outright cons and scams. With so much fear, opportunity knocks for the unscrupulous. You might hear whispers of miracle cures being sold by traveling mountebanks. Powders, elixirs, talismans, guaranteed to protect you for a price. People desperate and vulnerable would pay exorbitant sums for these placebos, only to sicken and die anyway. It's a grim reminder that even in the face of collective catastrophe, human greed persists. You might see one of these charlatans hawking their wares in a corner of the marketplace, surrounded by a small, hopeful, terrified crowd, their patter slick and false. Observing all this, the failing official measures the bizarre personal preventions, provides a strange, detached perspective. You with your mask and robe and official status are part of the rational for the time response based on classical medical texts and civic duty. But you are surrounded by a chaotic, desperate scramble for survival that encompasses everything from scientific theory to pure magic and superstition. It's a potent blend of fear, hope, ignorance, and fleeting knowledge. It makes you wonder as you trudge through the streets, stepping around refuse and giving wide berth to anyone who coughs, whether any of it makes a difference. Do the quarantines slow it down or just trap the healthy with the sick? Do the sanitation efforts matter when the disease feels carried on the very air you breathe? Do the herbs in your mask actually filter anything or just make you feel better? Does the flagellant's self-inflicted pain protect him or just weaken him further? Does the person smelling their urine-soaked rag stand any chance it's impossible to know in the moment? You see people who follow all the rules and die, and people who ignore everything and survive. Historians still argue whether any of these public health measures or individual preventions, prior to the understanding of germ theory and the development of effective treatments, had a significant impact on the course of plague epidemics, or if the outbreaks primarily ran their course based on factors like population, density, climate, and the natural virulence of the disease itself. Was it the quarantines or just the sheer number of susceptible people running out? Was it the prayers or just the environmental conditions changing? Was it the amulets or just random chance? From your perspective, living through it, it feels like a relentless, unstoppable force mocking all attempts to contain or ward it off. The official measures are like trying to build a dam out of straw, and the personal preventions are like trying to scare the flood away with silly noises. Both are expressions of a profound, terrifying helplessness. You walk on your boot crunching on something unidentifiable in the street. The constant low hum of fear is palpable. The smell of your herbs, once perhaps a comfort, now just feels like another flimsy layer of denial in the face of overwhelming evidence of failure. You adjust your mask, the leather stiff against your face. The sun, if it's out, feels weak and indifferent. The sky, often gray with smoke or just the general oppressive atmosphere, offers no comfort. You are surrounded by a city trying to fight a ghost, using methods that are mostly useless, occasionally harmful, and always a testament to the sheer blind terror gripping everyone. And you, official plague doctor, are just another part of this failing system, trying to record the death while hoping desperately that maybe, just maybe, one of these actions, official or bizarre, might somehow make a difference, not for the dead, but for the living, including yourself. But the evidence seen through your mask and recorded in your hidden notebook suggests otherwise. You've seen the official decrees fail, watched the desperate dance of personal superstitions, and walked the streets that mock every attempt at order. Now the most direct, most terrifying confrontation with the plague awaits standing at the bedside of someone who is sick. Your role isn't just observation and record-keeping, it's also supposedly healing. But healing feels like a very generous term these days. It's more like witnessing and occasionally trying things that rarely work. You get summoned to houses, sometimes by panicked relatives, sometimes by worried neighbors, sometimes by city officials conducting rounds. Each call is a gamble, a step deeper into the infected zone. You pull on your gear, the mask with its herbal filter, the heavy leather robe, the gloves. It feels less like protection and more like a costume for a macabre play, a flimsy barrier against an invisible enemy. You step into the house, and the air hits you. It's thick, heavy, often cloying with the smell of sickness, fear, and sometimes the futile burning of herbs. The patient is usually in bed, often writhing or listless, their face a mask of pain or confusion. You see the signs you've come to dread, the ones you note down in your hidden book with a leaden heart, the fever, the chills, the vomiting, the difficulty breathing, and then the telltale buboes, swollen black, painful lumps, usually in the groin, armpits, or neck. Seeing them confirms the diagnosis, removes all doubt, and replaces it with a cold certainty that settles deep in your bones. This isn't just a fever. This is the fever. Diagnosis itself, by your era's standards, is fairly straightforward once the buboes appear. Before that, it could be confused with other illnesses. But the lump's unmistakable. Your tools are basic, your eyes, your hands gloved you. Hope a simple probe to examine wounds, maybe a small knife. No fancy equipment, no microscopes. Just the raw, horrifying reality of the infected body. You might feel the patient's pulse note, their skin temperature, ask a few questions if they're coherent enough to answer. But mostly the plague announces itself with brutal clarity. Now comes the treatment. This is where the medical knowledge of the time collides head-on with the grim reality of a disease it cannot comprehend, let alone cure. Your training is based on ancient texts on Hippocrates and Galen on the theory of humors. The idea that illness is caused by an imbalance of the body's fluids. Blood phlegm, yellow bile, black bile. The plague, according to this framework, is often seen as a result of corrupted humors, perhaps brought on by foul air, miasma, or divine displeasure. So the standard treatments are aimed at rebalancing these humors or expelling the poison. Bleeding is one of the most common. You might apply leeches or make small incisions to drain blood, believing this removes the corrupted humor or the disease itself. It's a weakening procedure for someone already gravely ill, but it's standard practice. Purging is another, administering emetics to induce vomiting or laxatives to cause diarrhea again, trying to expel the perceived poison from the body. You might prepare a noxious concoction of herbs and other substances, holding it to the patient's lips, urging them to drink, watching their already suffering body be further distressed by the violent expulsion it causes. Then there's the treatment of the buboes themselves. These swollen lymph nodes are seen as external manifestations of the internal corruption. The accepted practice is to lance them, to cut them open to drain the pus and corrupted blood. It's a painful, risky procedure. You sterilize your knife the best you can, perhaps by passing it through a flame or simply wiping it clean, notions of germ theory being centuries away. You make the incision into the hot, swollen lump. The patient screams. Pus and blood might flow out. The hope is that releasing this material will release the disease, drawing the poison out of the body. Sometimes you might apply poultices afterwards made of various ingredients. Herbs, figs, yeast, even animal excrement. Yes, really. Remember that theme from Section 6. The smell of lanced buboes combined with the other effluvia of sickness is something that will stay with you forever. But here's the ethical dilemma that gnaws at you. You took an oath, perhaps a formal one, or just an internal commitment to heal the sick. That is your purpose, your identity. Yet standing over this person, knowing with almost absolute certainty that their fate is sealed, that your treatments are more likely to harm than help, and that simply being this close puts you at grave risk, it is soul-shaking. Do you stay and perform rituals, are likely futile, potentially contracting the disease yourself? Or do you make excuses, keep your distance, administer some token remedy, and retreat as quickly as possible, abandoning the patient to their fate? This is the brutal calculus of being a plague doctor. Your contract or civic duty requires you to attend the sick. Your humanity might compel you to try to alleviate suffering. Your instinct for survival screams at you to run. You see other physicians grappling with this. Some flee the city entirely at the first sign of the epidemic, earning them scorn, but perhaps saving their lives. Some attend only the wealthy who can pay exorbitant fees and perhaps offer safer conditions or simply more resources for the doctor's eventual burial. Others like you are officially appointed with a salary, sometimes paid, sometimes promised, required to serve the city's poor as well as its rich. You choose to attend because that is your role, your terrible calling in this time. But you learn to be quick, to minimize contact, to hold your breath when examining the buboes, to step back when the patient coughs. You try to maintain a professional detachment essential armor against the overwhelming suffering and fear. But it's hard. You see the faces of the sick, their pain, their terror, their pleading eyes, and the armor cracks. You see the desperation of their families watching helplessly, clinging to the hope that the doctor, the learned man, in the strange getup, can perform a miracle. But there are no miracles, only the grim progression of the disease. The practical challenges are immense. Medicines are scarce and expensive. Basic hygiene by modern standards is non-existent. You move from one sickbed to another, potentially carrying the contagion on your clothes, your hands, your tools, despite your best efforts. There are simply too many patients and too few trained people willing or able to help. You might see dozens of people a day, a blur of fevered faces and swollen buboes. Each encounter a drain on your physical and emotional reserves. You also encounter resistance and fear. Patients and their families might be terrified of you, not just because you represent the disease, but because of the drastic nature of your treatments. They might hide the sick-fearing, mandatory quarantine, or the terrifying procedures you perform. You might arrive at a house only to find the door barred or be met with hostility and suspicion. Your authority is often undermined by the sheer terror gripping the populace and the visible failure of your methods. Kind of makes ordering a patient to take 2 leeches and call me in the morning a tough sell when they just saw their neighbor die after doing the same thing. Beyond bleeding, purging, and lancing, physicians tried a host of other things, often combining traditional remedies with superstition and desperation. Applying strange plasters or poultices to the buboes or other parts of the body was common. These could contain anything from dried toad. Yet still making an appearance, remember that from section 6 to pigeon dung, precious stones ground into powder or complex herbal mixtures. The reasoning was often based on drawing out the poison or using sympathetic magic, like using a substance associated with poison to counteract it. A quirky or fringe tidbit from physicians' writings of the time includes detailed instructions for making plasters out of bizarre ingredients, such as a mix of clay, human, or animal excrement, and finely chopped roots applied directly to the lanced buboes. Imagine preparing and applying, with it trying to maintain a professional demeanor while fighting back revulsion and the knowledge that this is probably doing nothing or actively harming the patient. You might have a recipe for one of these in your own medical kit, a testament to the era's blind groping for remedies. Physicians also prescribe specific diets, often restrictive, believing that certain foods could worsen or improve the humoral balance. Rest was recommended, which was about the only universally beneficial piece of advice offered. Some physicians also incorporated prayers or religious rituals into their practice, acknowledging the spiritual dimension of the suffering and the belief that the plague was in part divine in origin. The psychological toll on a physician during an epidemic is immense. You are surrounded by death, helplessness, and fear, your patients, their families, and your own. You witness suffering on a scale that is almost unimaginable. You perform gruesome tasks with limited tools and even more limited understanding. You constantly face the possibility of infection. You see your colleagues sicken and die. The weight of this experience presses down on you day after day. It's why the notes in your private journal are so different from the official reports. They contain the raw truth, the fear, the doubt, the quiet despair. You might find yourself adopting personal rituals for protection, even if they contradict your medical training. Carrying a specific amulet, saying a certain prayer before entering a house, avoiding certain streets. The line between the rational physician and the terrified individual blurs considerably when faced with such overwhelming, inexplicable death. You are human after all, despite the mask and the robe. A mainstream historical fact about physicians during plague epidemics is that despite their education and efforts, the standard medical treatments of the time based on humoral theory, such as bleeding, purging, and lancing buboes, without proper antiseptic practice were largely ineffective and often detrimental to the patient's recovery. They might have provided some psychological comfort to the family the doctor is doing something, but they did not alter the course of the bubonic plague. So as you stand over a sickbed applying a dubious poultice or preparing to bleed a feverish patient, you are acutely aware of the gulf between intention and outcome. You are performing actions dictated by centuries of medical tradition, but you are seeing results that defy that tradition. People die regardless of treatment, or sometimes seemingly because of it. It forces a terrible internal conflict, a questioning of everything you've been taught. Is any of this worth it? Are you helping or just adding to the suffering before the inevitable end? Historians still argue whether the presence of physicians during plague epidemics, despite the ineffectiveness of their treatments, provided essential services beyond healing, such as diagnosing the disease, documenting its spread, providing comfort limited as it might have been, and contributing to the public administration's understanding, however flawed, of the crisis. Did you serve a vital function simply by being there bearing witness and trying, even if your methods were useless? Or were you simply another tragic figure in the epidemic's vast tableau of suffering and death, providing false hope while putting yourself at risk? From your perspective in the moment, covered in sweat under the leather robe, smelling the sickness and the fear, the debate feels academic. All you know is the next patient is waiting. You close your bag, wipe your instruments as best you can, and prepare to leave the house, hoping you don't carry the death with you. You step back into the street, the air feeling momentarily fresher, despite the pervasive city stench. A brief reprieve before the next summons pulls you back into the heart of the storm, back to the bedside, back to the futile battle against an enemy you cannot defeat, only document. You've closed the door on another house, the scent of sickness clinging to your clothes despite the herbal filters. The city air, even with its usual bouquet of refuse and desperation, feels like a relief compared to the suffocating atmosphere inside. You walk the streets heading back to your temporary lodgings or the place designated for physicians, and your mind begins to process. The faces, the symptoms, the futile procedures, they swirl behind your eyes. This is where the other part of your duty comes in, the part that separates the official record from the raw truth you hold inside. There are two sets of notes you keep. One is public, or at least official. This is the formal report required by the city authorities, the one that documents the deaths, the one that contributes to the grim statistics plastered on church doors or read aloud in council meetings. This report is dry factual, meant for bureaucrats and record keepers. It lists the name of the deceased, perhaps their age, the street they lived on, and the apparent cause of death, usually noted simply as plague or fever and buboes. It's a checklist of mortality devoid of human detail, meant to track the epidemic's relentless march across the city map. You fill these out with a practiced hand, usually at the end of a long, exhausting day, or even the next morning when the light is better and the immediate horror has receded slightly. The ink is standard, the paper official stock if you're lucky, maybe just rough parchment if supplies are tight. The language is formal, detached. Attended, name resident of street, confirmed presence of characteristic buboes. Patient expired on date. It's efficient, impersonal. It's what the city wants. It's what allows them to update the death tolls, perhaps initiate cleaning protocols, often futile, or arrange for disposal of the bodies, a service that is quickly overwhelmed. But then there is the other book, the hidden one. This is the one you keep tucked away, perhaps in a locked chest, or sewn into the lining of a bag, or hidden beneath loose floorboards. This is where the real notes go. This is your private ledger of suffering, your personal attempt to make sense of the chaos, your repository of observations that don't fit neatly into official categories. This book is smaller, perhaps, bound in worn leather, its pages filled with hurried, sometimes illegible script, stained with ink, maybe even the occasional droplet you hope isn't from a patient. Here you write down everything they don't want in the official reports. You describe the symptoms in agonizing detail, the color of the buboes, the quality of the cough, the delirium, the strange skin changes. You note the treatments you attempted, and more importantly, the results. Applied toad poultice to bubo, no drainage patient died within 4 hours. Tried bleeding from the arm, pulse weakened significantly, death followed swiftly. You track the failures, the near constant parade of interventions that change nothing. This book is a catalog of helplessness. It's also where you allow yourself to speculate, to ask questions that have no answers, to record things that border on the superstitious or the heretical. You might note that a patient's pet cat died shortly before they did, or that a house seemed untouched despite being next door to several infected dwellings, or that a certain street seemed particularly hard hit. You might write down your own theories, however wild, that the air is indeed poisoned, but not just by marsh gas, perhaps by something emanating from the earth itself, or that the stars hold some influence you don't understand. These are thoughts too dangerous, too uncertain, too unprofessional for the official record. Your hidden notebook becomes a confessional too. You might jot down your fear, your exhaustion, your despair. Saw 3 families wiped out on Elm Street today. My hands tremble. Dreamt of black lumps last night. Wonder if I carry the sickness myself. Every ache, every shiver sends a jolt of terror. These are the thoughts you can share with no one, certainly not the panicked populace or the demanding city officials. This notebook holds the weight of your experience unfiltered and raw. Think of it as the dark web of 14th century medical blogging, accessible only to you and maybe a very brave, very nosy spider. The official report is a facade, a necessary piece of administrative theater in the face of overwhelming death. It serves a purpose, providing data however flawed and maintaining a semblance of order. But your hidden notebook is the truth as you see it, messy, terrifying, and filled with the agonizing knowledge of your own limitations and the inexplicable nature of the disease. It's the difference between a tombstone inscription and the diary of the person buried beneath it. You might sit alone by candlelight, the only sound the scratch of your quill on parchment, filling the pages of your hidden book. You detail a case, patient male approx 40, healthy prior, taken ill suddenly 3 days past. Violent chills, burning fever. Noted large bubo in left groin yesterday morning. Lance this morning. Copious dark pus but no relief. Patient delirious pulse thready. Expired just before noon. Then perhaps a personal note. His wife wept, could offer no comfort. What are we doing? That last sentence would never appear in the official city report. It would betray doubt, and doubt is a luxury no one can afford, especially not the appointed physician. The pressure to maintain a facade of competence is immense. People look to you for answers, for hope. The official reports bland as they are contribute to this facade. They show that the authorities are acting, that physicians are diagnosing and treating. Your hidden notes, however, reveal the cracks in the system, the profound ignorance, the sheer brute force of the plague. One particularly gruesome detail you might record privately, something too unsettling for a public document, relates to the state of the bodies. While official notes might just say expired, your hidden notes might detail the speed of decomposition, the unusual colorations, the way the buboes sometimes seem to burst spontaneously, after death, or the strange odors that went beyond the expected. These observations might hint at the disease's rapid destructive nature, forcing you to confront the physical reality of the illness in a way the clinical language of the official report avoids. A quirky or fringe tidbit you might jot down in your hidden notebook is a correlation you've observed between the appearance of certain insects like flies or beetles in unusually large numbers just before an outbreak hits a specific house or area. You might wonder privately if they carry the sickness, a thought far removed from the dominant miasma or humor theories, but stemming purely from empirical, if superstitious, observation. Sidri, you wouldn't dare include such a notion in an official report, but in your private writings you allow yourself these wild leaps of thought, desperate for any pattern, any clue. Sometimes you use the hidden notebook to sketch crude anatomical drawings of the buboes, perhaps trying to understand their structure, or maps of areas marking houses that are afflicted, trying to see if proximity matters, if there's a pattern to the spread that the official citywide tallies miss. You might sketch the strange masks you wear, noting how hot and difficult they are to breathe, and how little protection they seem to offer when you are literally leaning over a dying person. You might even record recipes for treatments, but annotate them with your results. Tried the powdered emerald remedy on patient Z? No effect. Expensive failure. This is where you track what seems to work, rarely anything, and what definitely doesn't, almost everything. This practical, if depressing, data collection is solely for your own understanding, a desperate attempt at personal research in the midst of the crisis. Keeping these notes is a risk. If discovered by the wrong person, city officials, religious authorities, or even fearful neighbors, they could be misinterpreted. Admitting failure could lead to accusations of incompetence or even malfeasance. Speculating on non-humoral or non-divine causes could be seen as heresy. Your frank descriptions of the disease's horrors and the ineffectiveness of treatments could cause panic or undermine authority. These notes are a form of intellectual and emotional self-preservation, but they are also potentially dangerous. A mainstream historical fact is that while official records from plague periods often provide mortality statistics and administrative details, the private journals, letters, and treatises of physicians and other educated individuals offer invaluable, albeit subjective, insights into the lived experience of the epidemic, including the fear of the medical practices and the societal breakdown. It's in these less formal documents that we find the human element, the personal struggles, and the desperate attempts at understanding. Your hidden notebook is part of this tradition, whether you realize it or not. You might fill pages with descriptions of the smell, the cloying sweetness of decay, the metallic tang of blood, the acrid odor of vomit and sweat, the heavy miasma you believe permeates the air, and the faint lingering scent of the herbs in your mask. A constant reminder of the barrier, however thin, between you and the pestilence. These sensory details are too visceral for the dry official reports, but they are the reality you inhabit, and you need to record them somewhere, perhaps, to process them, perhaps simply not to forget. The sheer volume of death you record is staggering. In your official reports, they are just numbers added to a total. In your hidden notes, they are individuals, faces you saw, hands you touched with gloves, symptoms you observed. You might find yourself assigning nicknames to certain symptom patterns or types of buboes, a grim form of categorization that helps you cope, or perhaps just another way to distance yourself from the sheer scale of the human tragedy. Historians still argue whether these hidden personal observations by physicians, often based on flawed theories and limited understanding, nonetheless contained glimmers of empirical methodology or valuable epidemiological information that was simply misinterpreted within the scientific framework of the time. Did your notes about which houses got sick or which treatments never worked represent a nascent form of data collection that was a precursor to modern medical science? Or were they simply the desperate scribblings of a man trying to find meaning in an incomprehensible catastrophe? From your perspective hunched over your hidden book, the ink drying slowly in the dim light, it feels less like groundbreaking research and more like a desperate act of witnessing. You are recording the plague story from the front lines, not for posterity, but for survival. Intellectual, emotional, perhaps even physical, by trying to discern some pattern that might protect you. You close the book, hide it away, and prepare for the next day. The official reports sit neatly stacked, waiting to be delivered to the city council. They tell a story of numbers and dates. Your hidden book tells the other story, the one of pain, fear, failure, and the quiet, desperate search for understanding in the face of an enemy that respects neither knowledge nor authority. You carry both burdens, the public duty and the private truth, day after day in the heart of the dying city. You close the hidden notebook, the weight of its secrets pressing down on you. That desperate act of recording, of trying to make sense of the chaos through empirical observation, however flawed, stems from the fundamental question haunting everyone, not least yourself. How is this happening? How does it spread? Why one house, one family, and not the one next door? Why you reaching out to touch a fevered brow through a glove? Naturally, because you're not entirely insane, just stressed, while your colleague who seems to lick doorknobs for fun remains hale and hearty. The air outside feels marginally cleaner, but your mind is still trapped in the fetid rooms you've left behind. You walk in the city streets, usually bustling, with their own kind of chaotic energy, now feel hollowed out, punctuated by the mournful cries of the bereaved and the chilling calls of the cart drivers collecting the dead. Every breath you take feels like a gamble. Is this the breath that will bring the sickness into your lungs? Is it clinging to your clothes, your mask, the very soles of your boots? In your hidden notes, you record the observations, the messy data points. But in your mind and in discussions with fellow surviving physicians, the dominant theories of transmission swirl. These aren't just abstract academic debates. They are life and death hypotheses guiding your actions, shaping the desperate remedies you apply. The most widely accepted theory, the one taught in universities and preached from pulpits sometimes, is the miasma theory. You breathe it, you live it, you smell it constantly. The idea that the disease is carried in corrupt, foul air. This air, the miasma, is thought to rise from decaying matter. Swamps, unburied bodies, stagnant water piles of refuse left in the streets, and trust me, there are piles. This corrupted air enters the body through the nose and mouth, upsetting the balance of the humors, leading to sickness and death. This is why your mask is stuffed with sweet-smelling herbs. Lavender, mint, rose petals, perhaps even some precious ambergris, if you can afford it, or bribe someone into giving you a bit. The idea is that these fragrant substances will filter or counteract the noxious miasma before it reaches your lungs. It feels intuitively right given the terrible smells associated with sickness and death. When you walk into a plague house, the air is thick, heavy, and foul. Surely, that is the killer, the invisible poison entering your system. And it explains some things, or seems to. Areas with poor sanitation near marshes or open sewers often seem to be harder hit. People who work with unpleasant substances like tanners or gravediggers seem particularly susceptible, or perhaps they are just exposed to more corpses, a detail you might jot down privately. The theory provides a framework, a way to understand the seemingly arbitrary nature of the plague. It's the bad air. You just need to avoid it or purify it. Good advice in theory, less practical when your job involves spending hours elbow deep in said bad air. But miasma theory doesn't explain everything. Why does the plague sometimes leap over a seemingly healthy neighborhood to strike deep within another? Why does one person in a household die while others breathing the exact same putrid air remain well? These are the questions that gnaw at you, the inconsistencies that fuel the frantic scribbling in your hidden book. Beyond the miasma, other theories abound, often intertwined with the medical understanding of the time and deeply rooted in religious belief and astrology. A mainstream historical fact is that the prevailing medical understanding of the time was heavily based on Hippocrates and Galen's humoral theory, which proposed that illness resulted from an imbalance of the four humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. The plague, therefore, was often seen as a severe corruption or imbalance of these humors, possibly triggered by external factors like the miasma. So while the bad air might enter, it's the internal chaos it causes that actually kills you. This is why treatments often focused on rebalancing the humors through bleeding, purging, vomiting, or applying heat on cold. Attempts to drain away the excess or corrupted humor. You've tried them all, and the results, as your hidden notes sadly attest, are less than spectacular. Then there's the celestial influence. Many people, including educated scholars, believe the plague was caused by a conjunction of planets, particularly Jupiter, Saturn, and Mars. This alignment was thought to generate a powerful malignant vapor that descended to Earth, poisoning the air and causing disease. This theory offered a cosmic explanation for the plague's sudden appearance and wide reach. It was literally written in the stars. While this might sound like pure superstition today, in an era where astronomy was deeply intertwined with medicine and natural philosophy, it was a perfectly rational hypothesis based on the observable movements of the heavens. You might glance up at the night sky, wondering if the positions of those distant lights truly hold the key to the suffering you witness daily. Or perhaps it's an earthly phenomenon. Some theories suggested that earthquakes or volcanic activity released poisonous gases from deep within the earth, which then rose to the surface and caused the plague. After all, tremors sometimes preceded outbreaks in certain regions. This links back to the miasma idea, but gives it a subterranean origin. You might recall a minor tremor you felt weeks ago, and wonder if it was a harbinger of the horrors that followed. It's a desperate search for a tangible cause in a world where the true enemy is invisible. Divine punishment is, of course, always on the table. For many, the plague is God's wrath visited upon a sinful humanity. Your medical efforts in this view are either futile against God's will, or perhaps a humble attempt to alleviate suffering within the divine plan, assuming you're pious enough to frame it that way. This theory doesn't explain how it spreads physically, but it provides a spiritual rationale for why it's happening. It's hard to argue with this one when faced with such overwhelming death. Sometimes it feels like the world is ending. Amidst these grand theories of cosmic or earthly corruption, there are smaller, more localized observations people make, often misinterpreted. You might hear whispers about certain houses being cursed or families having bad luck. You might observe and jot down in your hidden book that in a particular street, the sickness seemed to spread rapidly from one house to the next, almost as if something was moving between them. But what could that something be? You might see rats. Lots of rats. They are everywhere in the city, scavenging in the refuse. You might even note in your private writings that you've seen dead rats around houses that subsequently fell sick. But you wouldn't connect the rats directly to the transmission of the disease itself. At most, you might see them as another symptom of the general decay and corruption that breeds the miasma, or perhaps their presence is simply a coincidence, another grim part of the dying city's landscape. The idea of a tiny flea biting a rat and then biting a human acting as a vector. That's centuries away from being understood. It's a frustrating blind spot, a piece of the puzzle you are nowhere near grasping. A quirky or fringe tidbit you might record in your notes. Something a patient or a fearful neighbor swore by is the idea that loud noises could drive away the miasma or the evil spirits causing the plague. This might lead you to witness desperate villagers ringing church bells, continuously firing cannons, or simply shouting loudly in the streets, all in a futile attempt to literally scare the plague away. You might write down the observation, noting the date and location, maybe adding a cynical, effect none visible in your private ledger. It's another example of humanity grasping at any possible action in the face of overwhelming helplessness, basing their methods on theories of airborne evil rather than biological transmission. These various theories, miasma humors, stars, divine wrath, earthly vapors, even loud noises, guide both official policies and personal behavior. City councils might order the burning of fragrant woods in the streets or the cleaning of refuse to combat the miasma. Physicians prescribe purges and bleeding to rebalance humors. People might wear amulets corresponding to astrological signs or pray incessantly to appease God. And you, the plague doctor, operate within this framework even as your hidden notes record observations that don't quite fit the anomalies that hint at an understanding you lack. You might spend hours discussing these theories with a colleague huddled over weak wine in a dimly lit room, the conversation a desperate attempt to intellectualize the horror. It's clearly the air driven by the foul humors within. Your colleague might insist citing Galen. You might counter cautiously based on your private observations. But I saw a family living right by the marsh, perfectly healthy, while the manor on the hill succumbed entirely. Does the miasma not reach uphill? These are dangerous questions bordering on challenging accepted wisdom. Your hidden notes are where you allow these challenging thoughts to live freely. You might also encounter individuals who dismiss all the scholarly theories clinging to simple, often contradictory notions. Avoid red food or eat only red food. Wear specific colors. Don't think about the plague or think about it constantly to steel yourself. These are less theories of transmission and more desperate personal rituals of avoidance born of fear and rumor rather than academic inquiry. You might note these down too as examples of the irrational behavior the plague induces, or perhaps with a tiny hopeful question mark. Could there be something to avoiding red food? Spoiler alert, no. Your notes will confirm this. Historians still argue whether the widespread focus on miasma and humoral imbalance, while scientifically incorrect regarding bacterial transmission, nonetheless encouraged some public health measures that had tangential benefits, such as promoting sanitation even if the reason was wrong, or isolating the sick even if the understanding of contagion was poor. Did the misguided theories accidentally lead to practices that slightly slowed the spread, like the mandated burning of clothes and bedding, or the quarantine measures that were increasingly implemented, however brutally? Or were these measures too little too late and based on such fundamentally incorrect principles that their impact was negligible compared to the brute force of the epidemic and the eventual development of natural herd immunity? Your daily reality, however, is less about historical debate and more about immediate action. You are operating under the best understanding available, flawed as it is. You advise patients to avoid corrupt air, to maintain a balanced diet, supposedly to keep humors stable, and you perform the standard ineffective treatments aimed at rebalancing those humors or drawing out the poison causing the buboes. You walk back through the deserted market square, the silence broken only by the distant tolling of a bell. The air smells faintly of wood smoke from homes where people are desperately burning fragrant logs to ward off the miasma. It's a comforting smell, a sign of life and resistance, even if the underlying theory is wrong. You breathe it in, hoping, praying that the herbs in your mask, the smoke in the air, and the balance of your own humors will be enough to protect you from the invisible enemy carried on the wind, or released from the earth, or sent by the stars, or whatever terrible unseen force is devastating your world. Your hidden notebook awaits your return, ready to receive more data points in the desperate ongoing attempt to understand how you might survive this. Given the theories you've just wrestled with, the bad air, the imbalanced humors, the malevolent stars, the angry god, it's perhaps not surprising that the treatments you encounter, the ones you desperately try, often feel less like medicine and more like a chaotic blend of folk wisdom, ancient texts misinterpreted, and sheer unadulterated panic. Your hidden notebook filled with clinical observations, or what passed for them, is also a grim catalog of these desperate remedies, a record of what was attempted and almost universally failed. You see it in every household you enter. The fear in the eyes isn't just about the sickness, it's about the agonizing uncertainty of how to fight it. You, the doctor, are supposed to have the answers, the cures. But often you're just another participant in the frantic, misguided theater of survival, prescribing treatments that your gut and your private notes tell you are useless, but which offer a semblance of hope to the dying and their terrified families. Bleeding is ubiquitous. It's the cornerstone of humoral therapy. If the humors are out of balance, particularly if there's an excess of blood, which the appearance of buboes might suggest in a warped interpretation, then letting some out seems logical. You nick a vein, often in the arm or leg, and watch the dark blood flow into a basin. Sometimes leeches are applied, their bloated bodies a grotesque testament to the attempt to drain the corrupted blood. The idea is to restore balance, to let the body purge itself of the poisonous excess. You perform this ritualistic draining, your hands steady, but your mind increasingly skeptical. Does it ever help your notes say no? At best, it weakens the patient further. At worst, it hastens their end. Yet it's what's expected. It's something you can do. Purging is another favorite aimed at expelling corrupted humors from the digestive system. Emetics concoctions to induce vomiting and strong laxatives are administered. The logic is similar to bleeding. Get the bad stuff out. You mix foul-tasting potions designed to provoke violent retching or explosive diarrhea. You see the patient's body convulsing, emptying itself, and the hope is that the illness is leaving with it. More often, it leaves the patient dehydrated, exhausted, and still very much sick. Again, your notebook logs these attempts, the dosages used, the results. The results are depressingly consistent. Then there are the external applications, particularly for the buboes, the swollen, painful lymph nodes that are the hallmark of the disease. These are often seen as concentrated pockets of the internal corruption, the body's attempt to draw the poison to the surface. The treatments focus on drawing out this poison or bursting the bubo. Heat is often applied, hot poultices made of various ingredients. But oh, the ingredients. This is where the treatments veer into the truly bizarre, reflecting the desperate grab for anything that might work, combined with ancient beliefs about sympathy and transference. You've seen poultices made of fig roots, dried toad, human excrement plaster resin, or even, and this is recorded with a weary sigh in your private notes, a living pigeon cut in half and applied still warm and twitching to the bubo. The belief here is that the living animal would draw the poison from the human body into itself. You watch this happening, the raw flesh against the swollen skin, the sheer horror of it, and you feel a profound sadness at the depths of desperation that lead people to such acts. Does the pigeon poultice work? Your notes, if they were ever found, would simply say, subject expired within hours, bubo unchanged, pigeon deceased. Antidotes and elixirs are another huge category. People consume all manner of strange and often expensive substances, hoping they will counteract the poison spreading within. Powdered unicorn horn, almost certainly rhinoceros horn, but the belief in its magical properties is strong and drives the price sky-high. Crushed pearls, emeralds dissolved in wine. These precious items are consumed for their supposed purifying qualities. Theriac, a complex mixture with dozens of ingredients including opium, is hugely popular, having been used for centuries as a panacea against poisons and diseases. You prescribe it knowing it might at best offer some pain relief due to the opium, but is unlikely to cure the plague. You also see a proliferation of simpler, more accessible remedies born of folk tradition and rumor. Garlic is widely consumed perhaps for its strong smell, linking back to miasma, or simply because it's associated with health. Vinegar is used for washing hands and surfaces, and people breathe its fumes, believing it will purify the air. You might recommend these too, not because you think they'll cure the plague, but because they are harmless mostly and give people something active to do. It's a small comfort in a world with so little comfort to offer. Preventative measures are equally varied and often peculiar. Wearing amulets or charms is common, inscribed with prayers, astrological symbols, or supposed protective words. Carrying posies of sweet-smelling flowers or herbs is another popular method explicitly linked to warding off the miasma. Some people follow strict dietary regimes, avoiding certain foods or eating only specific ones based on complex, often contradictory interpretations of humoral theory and planetary influences. Others try to regulate their emotions, believing that fear or sadness makes one more susceptible, while cheerfulness offers protection. Trying to be cheerful during a plague feels like a particularly cruel form of self-torture. You record these in your notebook too. Subject wore Jupiter amulet, contracted plague next day, or family consumed only root vegetables, all dead within week. These are data points, albeit from a perspective fundamentally misunderstanding the underlying biology. One pervasive and utterly heartbreaking treatment you document is flagellation. Driven by the belief that the plague is divine punishment for sin, groups of penitents whip themselves publicly, often processing through the streets, hoping to appease God's wrath through self-mortification. You witness this, the blood spattering the raw intensity of their belief, and you know with chilling certainty that it does nothing to stop the bacterium spreading. In fact, by bringing people together in close proximity, often injured and weakened it, likely AIDS transmission. Yet it persists, a powerful, desperate expression of spiritual terror. A mainstream historical fact about plague treatments is the widespread use of various quack cures and folk remedies alongside official medical treatments, reflecting the general ineffectiveness of contemporary medicine against the disease. While university-trained physicians like yourself prescribe treatments based on humoral theory and ancient texts, the vast majority of people also relied on remedies passed down through families, sold by charlatans or promoted by desperate neighbors. It created a confusing landscape where ineffective medical practices mixed freely with outright scams and well-meaning but useless folk cures. Among the most bizarre and fringe treatments you might note down, perhaps described to you by a patient who tried it before calling you or observed in another afflicted household, is the idea of breathing the air from a sealed jar containing something foul or infectious. The reasoning behind this, if any existed beyond sheer madness, is lost to you. Perhaps it was a twisted interpretation of like cures like, or an attempt to get the sickness over with. But you hear whispers of people intentionally exposing themselves to noxious vapors or even exhaling into jars for others to inhale. This falls firmly into the category of things you record with a note of bewildered horror. You've heard rumors too impossible to verify of people bearing themselves up to their necks in earth, or sleeping next to goats, or wearing clothes made entirely of silk. Each rumor is a testament to the boundless human capacity for hope in the face of hopelessness and the willingness to try literally anything. You might sketch a quick note in your book about the silk clothes rumor. Expensive, surely ineffective, but you note it down anyway. Everything is data now, no matter how improbable. There's also the practice of cauterizing the buboes with a hot iron. The scream of the patient, the smell of burning flesh. These are sensations you try to push away, but they are seared into your memory. The idea is to burn out the poison. It is agony and rarely, if ever, effective in saving the patient's life. It is a brutal treatment born of desperation, a physical manifestation of the fight against an invisible enemy. You've performed it, your hand shaking slightly, the patient's cries echoing in the small, suffocating room. You recorded the outcome. It wasn't good. Historians still argue whether the sheer volume and variety of ineffective treatments, while individually useless or even harmful, collectively served any broader psychological or social purpose during the plague, such as maintaining hope, providing a sense of agency in a powerless situation, or simply keeping populations occupied and less prone to complete breakdown? Did this whirlwind of bleeding, purging, poulticing, and potion drinking provide a vital, if ultimately futile, psychological bulwark against the overwhelming terror? Or did it simply add another layer of suffering and chaos to an already unbearable situation? You ponder this as you walk between houses, the strange smells of burning herbs mixing with the ever-present stench of decay. You pass a group of people boiling roots in a pot over a small fire in the street, muttering incantations. You see another person diligently rubbing a live chicken against their armpit. These are not scientific experiments in the modern sense, but desperate acts of faith in a world where reason has failed. Your notebook is a silent confidant, the only place where you can acknowledge the truth. Almost none of this works. The bleeding weakens them. The purges dehydrate them. The poultices do nothing but perhaps irritate the skin further. The potions are mostly inert or worse. The amulets are just trinkets. The prayers, while perhaps offering spiritual solace, provide no physical protection. Yet you continue to try. You apply the poultices you administer, the purges you advise on diet and fresh air. A rare piece of advice that actually has merit, even if your reasons for giving it are based on miasma theory. You do this not because you believe these treatments will cure the plague. Your notes offer stark evidence to the contrary, but because it is your role. It is what the patient and their family expect. It is the only framework for action available to you. To do nothing would be unthinkable, a surrender to the inevitability of death that you are sworn to fight however futilely. Every treatment is a small battle fought and lost and recorded in your hidden ledger. The sheer volume of ineffective interventions is staggering, a testament to both the lack of understanding of infectious disease and the profound innate human drive to fight for survival, no matter how slim the chance, no matter how bizarre the method. You close your eyes for a moment, inhaling deeply through your herbal mask, trying to filter out not just the stench of death, but the overwhelming sense of futility that clings to you like the plague itself. The search for a cure is a desperate, blindfolded stumble through the dark. Emerging from the chaos of ineffective treatments and the stench of despair, you must prepare for the next visit, the next desperate plea. And this requires you to don the uniform, the outfit that has become your chilling signature. The iconic, terrifying gear that marks you as both healer and harbinger of death. You pull on the heavy linen coat treated with waxes or oils to make it somewhat resistant to the airborne miasma you believe is the true enemy. It's thick, cumbersome, and even in the cool air, you feel the heat begin to build inside. The long gloves go on next, pulled up over your sleeves, followed by the sturdy boots. A broad-brimmed hat, often made of leather, completes the basic ensemble meant to shield your head from airborne poisons, or maybe just to project authority like a particularly morbid beekeeper. But the centerpiece, the element that truly defines your appearance and strikes terror into the hearts of those who see you approach, is the mask. Crafted from stiffened leather, it fits snugly over your face, covering your mouth and nose, entirely punctuated by two small glass lenses for eyes that distort your vision and turn the world into a hazy greenish or grayish blur. And then there is the beak. Long curved and utterly unnatural, this beak is not just for show. It is the core of the mask's function, a repository for protection. Inside the beak, you stuff strong-smelling aromatic substances, dried herbs, lavender, mint, rosemary, thyme, camphor, crushed flowers, spices, vinegar-soaked sponges, even sometimes garlic. The idea, rooted firmly in the miasma theory, is that these potent aromas will filter or purify the corrupted air before it reaches your lungs, preventing the pestilence from entering your body through your breath. You inhale deeply, and the sharp, cloying mixture of scents fills your nostrils, momentarily masking the ubiquitous smell of sickness and decay that permeates the city. It's not exactly pleasant, often feeling more like you've shoved a potpourri sachet up your nose, but it's a psychological barrier as much as a physical one. You believe it works, and in this world steeped in fear and misinformation, belief is a powerful, if ultimately ineffective, shield. Wearing this full getup is an experience in itself. The heavy fabric restricts your movement, the hat bumps against door frames, and the mask feels like a hot, suffocating vice on your face. Your breath fogs the glass lenses, further limiting your already distorted view. The smell of the herbs inside the beak is overwhelming, sometimes making you lightheaded. Sound is muffled, distorted. You are sealed off, isolated inside this bizarre shell. It's hot, uncomfortable, and honestly, you feel a bit ridiculous sometimes, like a giant, flightless bird of doom stomping through the streets. One upside. You can definitely tell who hasn't showered in a while from, well, everyone. Another, no one asked you to pick up milk on the way home. You carry a wooden staff, an essential tool. It allows you to examine patients or their surroundings without touching them directly. You can lift bedclothes, point to symptoms, push away crowds, or even in a more macabre turn, gently prod a body to check if someone is truly deceased without laying a hand upon them. It provides a necessary distance in a time when physical contact is fraught with deadly peril. This entire ensemble is fascinating because despite its formidable appearance and the serious intent behind it, protection via miasma filtering, it was remarkably ineffective against the actual vectors of the plague fleas and the bacteria they carried. The heavy coat might offer some minimal barrier, but exposed skin at wrists or ankles or gaps in the mask seal rendered it largely useless against flea bites. The aromatic herbs did precisely nothing to stop Yersinia pestis from entering the body, whether through bites or potentially, though, debated respiratory transmission in certain forms of the disease. It was a sophisticated-looking defense built entirely on the wrong understanding of the enemy. It's like designing a bulletproof vest to protect against bad smells. Impressive craftsmanship, wrong problem. Yet its impact was undeniable, not for its protective qualities, but for its symbolic power. When people saw you approaching in this gear, they didn't see a healer. They saw the plague itself given form. You were death's messenger, a grim black figure silhouetted against the gray sky, a walking beaked embodiment of the pestilence that had gripped their world. Children screamed and hid. Adults recoiled in fear, sometimes mixing reverence with terror. Your appearance was a visual cue that the sickness had arrived, often irreversible, and that death was likely imminent. You were not just a doctor, you were a living, breathing, terrifying icon of the times. A mainstream historical fact about this gear is that while depictions of bird-like masks date back to the 17th century, the full ensemble often associated with plague doctors was primarily popularized in later historical accounts and illustrations, particularly the design credited to Charles Delorme, physician to Louis XI of France around 1630. While some form of protective clothing and masks using aromatic substances were undoubtedly used during outbreaks before this, the specific elaborate costume with the long beak became widely represented and later manufactured as the quintessential plague doctor attire after Delorme's description and through subsequent artistic depictions. So while the idea existed earlier, the specific look we recognize today is more of a 17th century invention and later historical archetype than a uniform from, say, the Black Death of the 14th century. Though honestly, it looks pretty metal, doesn't it? Like a gothic superhero, if superheroes mostly supervised agonizing death. Thinking about its effectiveness, or lack thereof, in relation to the real cause of the plague, adds another layer of historical irony. Here you are meticulously stuffing your beak with rosemary to ward off foul air, while the true enemy, the flea vectors, hopping merrily through the straw on the floor, completely unconcerned with your aromatic defenses. It's a profound disconnect between perceived threat and actual danger, a testament to how little was truly understood about disease transmission back then. There are smaller, quirkier details about the suit and the doctors who wore them that sometimes surface in records or anecdotes. One quirky or fringe tidbit is that the mask's beak was sometimes used not just for herbs, but also carried small vials of potent smelling salts or other stimulants the doctor could sniff if they felt faint or overwhelmed by the noxious smells of sickness and death. Imagine mid-visit, you suddenly pull out a little bottle from your beak and take a sharp inhale of something pungent to keep yourself upright. It adds a strangely practical, almost mundane detail to the otherwise theatrical appearance. It's not all dramatic pronouncements and poking with sticks. Sometimes it's just trying not to pass out from the stench. The very creation and adoption of this suit, particularly in the form designed by Delorme, highlights a shift. It represents an attempt, however misguided by current knowledge, to apply rational principles, at least rational within the framework of miasma theory, to protection moving beyond purely spiritual or superstitious measures. It was an occupational hazard uniform specifically designed for those who had to enter the most dangerous environments. The homes of the sick and dying. It gave the wearer a distinct identity, separating them visually from the terrified populace, and in theory protecting them from the very air everyone else feared to breathe. But did it offer any protection? Historians still argue whether the mere bulk and layers of the coat and other garments offered incidental, albeit minimal protection against flea bites, or if the gear was entirely useless and its wearer's survival, if they did survive, was simply down to luck, genetics, or avoiding infected environments when not working. Was there any unforeseen benefit to the design, or was it purely a theatrical and psychologically driven, yet ultimately ineffective measure? It's hard to say for sure. Records aren't detailed enough to track doctors' survival rates based specifically on suit usage versus other factors. The experience of wearing it certainly changes you. You feel detached, observing the suffering around you through a veil of leather and distorted glass. It creates a barrier not just physical, but emotional. People treat you differently. They speak to the mask, not to the man inside. You become an object, a figure associated with the worst kind of suffering. The constant discomfort, the limited senses, the sheer otherness of the costume, it all contributes to a sense of isolation even when you are surrounded by people. You are the plague doctor, a role that consumes your identity. Sometimes you catch your reflection in a window or a polished surface and are momentarily startled by the grotesque figure looking back. It's a stark reminder of the role you play, the burden you carry. You move through the streets, a dark, silent shape, the sounds of your heavy boots echoing slightly, the faint, cloying smell of your beak full of herbs preceding you. You are a walking paradox dedicated to preserving life, yet embodying the omnipresent threat of death. The suit is your shield, your symbol, and your cage. It isolates you from the world you are trying to save, transforming you into something both necessary and feared. You adjust the mask, the leather stiff against your skin. The next house awaits. The treatments inside will likely be as futile as the last, administered by a figure who looks less like a healer and more like a nightmare. But you have to go. You are the plague doctor, and the plague waits for no one. Stepping out of the suit, or perhaps just finding a quiet corner within your own temporary sanctuary, maybe a requisitioned room far from your own home, a place you can try mostly in vain to decontaminate, you shed the heavy layers. The relief is immense, a physical release from the heat, the weight, the stifling smell of potent herbs that now feels less like a filter and more like a permanent part of your nasal passages. But the shedding of the suit doesn't shed the day. The sights, the sounds, the smells linger, clinging to your skin like a second, more insidious set of garments. You wash your hands repeatedly, scrub your face, but the residue of suffering feels indelible. This is when the other part of the job begins, the part that doesn't require the terrifying mask, but perhaps demands an even more profound kind of courage, facing yourself and trying to make sense of the unending horror you witness daily. This is where the hidden notebooks come in. You find a quiet spot, perhaps by the dying light of a single candle, or the pale gray of dawn creeping through a grimy window. You pull out a small leather-bound book, its pages rough, its binding worn from frequent use. This isn't an official ledger of patients or treatments to be reviewed by some counsel, though you might keep a separate, sanitized version of that. This is something else. This is where the unvarnished truth goes, the thoughts you can't speak aloud, the observations too grim, too strange, or too revealing for polite company, even in this era of universal grimness. The quill scratches softly across the page, a small comforting sound in the oppressive silence. You dip it in ink, the faint metallic tang mixing with the ever-present scent of camphor and sickness. What do you write? You write about the faces, the hollow eyes, the frantic fear, the vacant stares of those too far gone. You write about the desperate pleas you can't answer, the promises you can't keep. You write about the futile remedies you administer, knowing deep down they are useless, perhaps even harmful. You record the swelling buboes, black and angry, the fevered ramblings, the rapid decline that turns a vibrant person into a corpse within hours. You might jot down the number of houses visited today, the number of dead counted. But then you add details that would never make it into an official report. The mother who tried to hide her sick child under the floorboards. The old man who sang hymns until he lost his voice. The entire family found dead around the dinner table plate still set. These are not just statistics. They are tragedies, each one a needle-sharp jab to your already frayed nerves. You try to maintain a detached clinical tone writing, Patient X, male approx, 40 symptoms, onset 2 days ago. Bubo in groin, administered poultice of fig and onion. But then the next line might read, his wife wept. I could do nothing but stand there like a fool in my suit smelling of flowers while he choked. The physical toll is immense, and you record that too. The aching back from bending over beds, the sore feet from endless walking, the gnawing hunger. Because who has time or appetite to eat properly? You might note, head throbs. Smell of beak herbs makes me nauseous. Slept 2 hours standing leaning against a wall. Better than nothing. Or, felt a strange itch on my arm today. Froze. Examined it for an hour. Probably just a spider bite. Or was it? The constant low-grade hum of fear is your unwelcome companion, a fear you can't show, especially not to the terrified families who look to you, the grotesque Birdman, for salvation. You encounter bizarre things, strange requests, moments of dark humor born of sheer desperation. You might record, woman asked if wearing a hat made of cat fur would help, advised against it, suggested vinegar wash instead. She died an hour later. Maybe the cat fur would have worked joke. Probably. Or, man offered me his entire fortune if I could save him. It was 3 coppers and a rusty spoon. Declined. Left the spoon. These little absurdities are pinpricks of light in the overwhelming darkness, moments you need to capture, perhaps just to prove to yourself that you haven't entirely lost your mind. It's grim stuff, sure, but hey, at least it's consistent. You know exactly what you're going to get every single day: death, despair, and questionable home remedies. It's like a terrible subscription service you can't cancel. The notebooks are also a place to vent frustrations. Frustration with the ineffectiveness of treatments, with the sheer scale of the epidemic, with the authorities who are often slow, incompetent, or absent. City Council met again today. Discussed banning public gatherings. The plague is in their lungs, not the streets, you fools. What good is banning dances when they are dying in their beds? Frustration with charlatans preying on fear, selling useless amulets or dangerous potions. Saw a man selling powdered unicorn horn outside the sick house. Cost a king's ransom. Wonder if it tastes chalky. Didn't ask. Wish I had. Just kidding, mostly. You've seen enough real suffering. You don't need to witness financial ruin on top of it, even if the idea is morbidly fascinating. Why keep these hidden? For many reasons. Firstly, discretion. You write things about families, about their final moments, details they might not want shared. Secondly, protection. You might write critical things about the city leadership, about other physicians, or even about the efficacy of prescribed treatments that the authorities mandate. Such criticisms could lead to trouble accusations of incompetence or even treason in desperate times. Wrote that mandated bleeding only hastens the end. Must hide this page. If Master Thomas sees this, I'll be the one bled dry. Thirdly, privacy. These are your raw, unprocessed thoughts and feelings. They show your fear, your doubts, your moments of despair. The terrifying, emotionless figure in the beak mask is a necessary performance. The person filling these pages is vulnerable, human, and terrified. You can't let the world see that crack in the armor. A mainstream historical fact related to this is that while records from officials, city chroniclers, and some general physicians discussing plague outbreaks exist in historical archives, detailed verified personal diaries written by the specific plague doctor figures known for wearing the beak mask are exceedingly rare, with many attributed accounts later proven to be fictional or embellished. The iconic image was widely circulated, but the intimate personal narratives of those behind the mask are largely missing from the historical record, adding to the mystery and letting us speculate on what might have filled such private notebooks. It's like everyone saw Batman, but nobody kept a diary written by Bruce Wayne as Batman. This rarity makes you wonder what was important enough for some of the less known figures to jot down. One quirky or fringe tidbit sometimes suggested in historical fiction or interpretations is that besides medical observations and personal fears, Some doctors might have recorded strange local superstitions they encountered regarding the plague god, cures people were trying, or even brief dark poems or sketches as a macabre way to process the overwhelming horror. Imagine finding a sketch of a particularly memorable bubo next to a scribble about a villager trying to ward off rats by dancing naked under the moon. It gives a glimpse into the sheer strangeness and desperation of the times, and perhaps the fraying sanity of the person witnessing it. You write until your hand aches, until the candle gutters, until the thoughts in your head quiet just a fraction. It's a form of catharsis, a way to deposit the day's burden onto paper so you don't have to carry it all internally. But it's also a testament, a silent scream into the void, a record of a time so horrific it feels unreal, even as you are living it. The question of why these specific types of doctors' personal accounts are so scarce compared to other contemporary writings leads to another point of debate. Historians still argue whether the surviving fragmented writings attributed to individuals in these roles were purely clinical logs intended for professional use, personal journals for emotional release and processing trauma, or intended in some small way as historical records for future generations, written in the desperate hope that someone might one day learn from this catastrophe. Were they writing for themselves, for their colleagues, or for a distant, unknown audience? It's hard to definitively say, especially given the scarcity and questionable authenticity of many claimed plague doctor diaries. Maybe they just wrote, hoping the ink would absorb some of the pain. The act of writing forces you to confront the day again, but on your terms, in your own words. You analyze the failed treatments, wonder if you missed something, replay the dying moments you witnessed. There's no peer review, no one to discuss cases with in this isolated line of work, only the silent pages of your notebook. It becomes a mirror reflecting the terrible reality back at you, but also a shield, a small space where you have control, where you can impose some semblance of order on the chaos by simply describing it. You close the book, tuck it away in its hiding place, perhaps inside a loose floorboard behind a brick in the hearth, or sewn into the lining of a secret pocket in your non-suit clothes. It's your secret, your burden, your unsung history. No one sees the tears that might fall onto the page, the tremor in your hand as you write about a child's last breath, or the quiet despair etched into your face in the flickering candlelight. They only see the suit, the mask, the terrifying symbol. And tomorrow the cycle begins again. Don the mask, face the sickness, witness the death, shed the suit, and perhaps, if you survive, add another entry to the hidden record of your quiet, unbearable struggle. The ink is drying on today's page, holding the weight of countless sorrows. You stand before the bed, the figure beneath the rough blanket, barely discernible in the gloom. The air here is thick, heavy, with the cloying smell of sweat, unwashed linens, and something else, something sickly sweet and rotten, only partially masked by the assertive bouquet of herbs packed into your beak. Your breathing inside the mask feels shallow, strained, each inhale pulling against the aromatic barrier. It's hot, and you can feel the sweat starting to prickle on your skin beneath the thick waxed fabric of the suit. The glass eye holes are slightly fogged at the edges, further obscuring your view. The figure on the bed stirs a low moan, escaping cracked lips. This is the merchant, or what's left of him. His wife stands near the door, wringing her hands, her face pale, and drawn, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and desperate hope fixed on your masked face. You can't make out her features clearly through the glass, but her posture, her trembling, speaks volumes. Another figure, perhaps a son or daughter, lurks further back in the shadows. They keep their distance as if afraid the disease might leap from the sick man across the room and through your supposedly protective gear. You raise your stick, the long wooden shaft feeling clumsy in your gloved hand. It's your interface with this world, your substitute for touch. You gently nudge the blanket near the man's shoulder. He flinches. You can see the swell beneath the fabric, the telltale sign, the bubo. It's perhaps the most horrifyingly iconic symptom, the reason this particular plague is called the bubonic plague. These painful swollen lymph nodes, often appearing in the groin, armpits, or neck, are the disease making itself horribly visible. They can range in size from an egg to an apple, and they pulse with pain and infection. You use the stick's end to carefully lift a corner of the blanket. The sight makes even the strong herbal smell in your mask seem insufficient. The bubo is large, angry red and purple, glistening tautly against the skin. It looks incredibly painful, radiating heat that you can almost feel through your glove in the stick. The skin around it is inflamed. There might be others you can't see easily. The man shifts again, groaning louder this time, pulling his limbs instinctively away from the source of agony. His skin looks flushed, feverish. His breath comes in ragged gasps. You need to observe to document. This is the purpose of your visit beyond any attempt at treatment. The city authorities demand detailed records. Where the cases are, who is affected, what symptoms are present. You fumble in your pocket for your notebook, the thick leather feeling strange through your gloves. Pulling it out is a bit of a wrestling match. Then the charcoal pencil. Holding it, making the fine movements needed for writing, is awkward and slow. You kneel carefully beside the bed, keeping a respectful and self-preserving distance, using the stick to prop open the notebook against the bed frame. You lean in slightly, your masked head tilted, trying to get a better look through the glass eye holes, ignoring the intense smell of sickness emanating from the man. You start to jot down notes. Patient, merchant's name if you know it, otherwise, male adult. Age estimate based on appearance. Location, address. Symptoms, high fever apparent. Difficulty breathing, large bubo. Location, note groin or armpit if visible. Your handwriting is messier than usual, the charcoal scratching faintly on the page. You look up at the wife who has taken a step closer, her voice a hoarse whisper. Doctor, is there anything you can do? The pain, he is burning with fever. You nod slowly, the movement, feeling stiff inside the suit. What can you do? The options are horrifyingly limited and mostly ineffective. The dominant medical theories are based on humors, imbalances in the body's fluids, and miasma, the bad air. Treatments revolve around restoring balance or expelling the badness. Bleeding is one common approach, literally cutting a vein to let bad blood out, hoping to rebalance the humors or drain the sickness. It's brutal, often weakens an already desperately ill patient, and as you might suspect, does precisely nothing against a bacterial infection. Lancing the buboes is another, puncturing these swollen nodes to drain the pus and corrupted humors. This is incredibly painful for the patient, carries a huge risk of secondary infection, given the lack of sterile tools or any understanding of sterility, and often just spreads the bacteria further. Poultices are applied, concoctions of herbs, clay, even dried animal dung or urine plastered onto the buboes, or other parts of the body meant to draw out the poison or soothe the swelling. Some of these might have had mild antiseptic properties, but mostly they were just messy, uncomfortable, and useless against the underlying infection. Sweating was encouraged sometimes by wrapping the patient in thick blankets and giving them hot drinks in the belief it would expel the sickness through pores. Thinking about these treatments makes you feel a cold dread settle over you, despite the heat of the suit. You have little to offer that truly helps. Your role is often more about prognosis, usually grim documentation, and overseeing the grim necessities. Isolation, arranging removal of the dead. You look at the bubo again, lancing it. The thought is sickening. You've seen it done. The patient screams the horrific mess, the fact that they usually die shortly after anyway. It feels like torture masquerading as medicine. Bleeding is less graphic, but equally pointless. Poultices. You could recommend one, perhaps give them a simple herbal mix you carry. It feels like a placebo, a way to offer something, anything to people staring into the abyss. It was a mainstream historical fact that the most common treatments for the plague involved bleeding, lancing buboes, and applying various poultices, none of which were effective against the Yersinia pestis bacterium causing the disease. Physicians and healers of the time were working with fundamentally incorrect models of illness, relying on centuries-old theories that offered no real defense against this new terrifying foe. It was the medical equivalent of trying to fight a tank with a pointy stick. You might feel like you're doing something, but the outcome is sadly predictable. The wife pleads again. Please, doctor, his fever is so high, he talks out of his head sometimes. You manage a muffled, he is very ill. The fever, it is a bad sign. You hesitate. Have you applied anything to the swelling? She nods, tears welling in her eyes. Yes, doctor. The healer from down the street before he got sick himself, he told us to use a paste of fig root and yeast. and we put warm cloths on it. Fig root and yeast. You've heard of worse. You've also heard of things like ground emeralds, powdered unicorn horn if you could find it, or dried toads stuffed into a cloth and hung around the neck. The sheer variety of desperate, often bizarre remedies people tried is astounding. It speaks to the utter confusion and terror surrounding the disease. If one thing doesn't work, try literally anything else, no matter how strange on the off chance it might make a difference. You recall reading about a particularly grim practice sometimes recommended. A quirky or fringe tidbit involved using live animals such as chickens or pigeons cut open and applied still warm to the buboes with the belief that the animal could draw out the poison. The idea was that the disease essence would transfer from the human to the animal. While not a widespread medical practice endorsed by universities, it was a desperate folk remedy often suggested by local healers or wise women highlighting the blend of superstition and empirical, though flawed, observation people resorted to. Imagine trying to explain that in your notebook. Patient treated with one slightly confused pigeon, warmed to human body temperature, applied directly to groin region. Outcome unchanged pigeon, deceased. You shake your head slightly inside the mask. You won't recommend that. You consider the poultice they're already using. Continue with the paste. You say, your voice muffled. Keep him warm. Try to get him to drink water if you can. There is little else at this stage. You can't bring yourself to suggest bleeding or lancing, not yet, maybe not at all, unless ordered by a higher authority. It feels too cruel, too futile. You continue jotting notes, recording the meager treatment being applied. Treatment attempted by family poultice of fig root and yeast applied to bubo. Doctor advises continuation hydration warmth. You feel a pang of guilt writing, doctor advises continuation when you know it's useless. But what else can you write? Doctor advises praying and preparing for the worst? That's the truth, but it won't satisfy the city officials, and it certainly won't comfort this terrified family. Your gaze sweeps the room again through the glass eyepieces. The family watches your every move, their faces etched with fear and grief. The air feels thicker, warmer. The smell of herbs is less invigorating now, more like a cloying weight pressing against your nostrils. The heat inside the suit is becoming oppressive. You can feel sweat dripping down your temples. It pools slightly inside the bottom of the mask, an unpleasant sensation. You realize you need to finish your documentation and move on. There are undoubtedly other calls to make, other homes to visit, other scenes of suffering to witness and record. Your notebook isn't just a record of symptoms and locations. It's a chronicle of the city's agony, entry by entry, house by house. Each page turned is another life struck down, another family devastated. You write a final observation, prognosis grave. It's a word you use frequently these days. Under intervention, you write advised symptomatic care and continued poultice. No further medical intervention deemed effective at this stage. It's a clinical way of saying, there is nothing I can do. The charcoal scratches the page, a small dry sound in the heavy silence of the room. Historians still argue whether physicians treating the plague genuinely believed their methods were effective, or if they felt compelled by societal expectation and their professional role to at least attempt treatment, even knowing its probable futility. Did they cling to outdated theories out of conviction or desperation? Historians still argue whether plague doctors, despite their often ineffective treatments, maintained genuine belief in their methods, or if their efforts were primarily driven by the societal expectation that something must be done in the face of such devastating illness. It's hard to know the true thoughts behind those masks, whether they were filled with blind faith, grim resignation, or a desperate clinging hope against all evidence. Standing up the movement of the thick suit feels cumbersome. You secure your notebook and pencil back in your pocket. You turn to the wife, nod your masked head slowly. I have made my observations, you say, your voice muffled. I will report his condition. She takes a step towards you, her hand reaching out tentatively, then stopping short as if remembering the barrier you represent. Doctor, will you come back? You hesitate. You know you likely won't. There's little point unless it's to confirm the inevitable and oversee the removal of the body. You can't give false hope. I will report to the authorities. You repeat, sidestepping the question of return. It's a cruel necessity of the job. You can't afford to become emotionally invested in each case, or you would break. The suit helps with that. It's a physical and emotional shield. You turn and walk towards the door, the heavy fabric swishing the sound loud in the quiet room. The family stays where they are watching you go, a mixture of fear and despair following your retreating figure. You feel their eyes on your back, two pinpricks of glass in the dark leather staring ahead. Reaching the door, you have to fumble again with your gloved hand to find the latch. It opens with a groan. Stepping back out into the street, the air, though still smoky and gritty, feels relatively fresher than the sickness-laden air inside the house. The sunlight, or whatever weak light is filtering through the plague haze sky, seems momentarily bright after the dim interior. You pull the door shut behind you, the click of the latch final. You stand on the street again alone, encased in your suit, the silence of the deserted street amplifying the sound of your own breathing within the mask. You have done your duty. You have documented another case. You have offered what little comfort and ineffective advice you could. You are the plague doctor, and you move on to the next address, the next grim reality. The smell of herbs is still strong, but you think you can still detect faintly the lingering odor of sickness clinging to your robes. Or perhaps it's just in your mind. You stand on the street, the heavy suit a shell, the air momentarily feeling less thick than the confines of the sick room you just left. Your heart rate, already elevated from the stuffiness and the grim encounter, slowly begins to settle. You take a deep breath, the herbs in your beak filter still doing their job, though the scent is less a comfort now and more a constant reminder of why you need them. The silence of the street is oppressive, broken only by the distant sound of a cart rattling on cobblestones, perhaps the death cart on its rounds. Your immediate next step isn't another house visit, not usually. It's the documentation. The notes you scribbled awkwardly in your small notebook need to be transferred to the official record, the city's great ledger of death and disease. It's a physical manifestation of the plague's advanced page after page, filling with names, addresses, dates, and grim outcomes. This is where your cryptic observations become data points, fuel for the city's desperate, often clumsy attempts to understand and contain the spread. You start walking, the heavy leather suit rustling and creaking with each step. The heat is building again. You adjust the mask slightly, trying to relieve the pressure on your nose. Your destination is likely the city's temporary administrative office for the plague, maybe the Guild Hall of Physicians, if one exists and is still functioning, or just a commandeered building near the central square. It's where the other doctors or those few who remain gather to report where the ledgers are kept and where the city officials try to make sense of the unfolding disaster. As you walk, you see the signs of the city's struggle everywhere. Houses are shuttered, many boarded up tight. Some bear the dreaded marking, a crudely painted red cross on the door, sometimes accompanied by a scrawled date. You avert your gaze instinctively. Those houses are tombs, whether literal or figurative remains to be seen, but they are places where life has been officially suspended quarantine. Reaching the reporting office is a relief despite the grim purpose. There's a guard at the door, not to keep people out, but to try and manage the flow and perhaps prevent panicked citizens from trying to bribe their way in to demand help or information. You show your identifying badge, a piece of metal, declaring you one of the city's contracted plague doctors. The guard, often wearing a cloth mask or holding a vinegar-soaked rag to their face, nods you through, keeping their distance. Inside, the atmosphere is one of weary chaos. Clerks bent over massive ledgers, quill pens scratching furiously. Doctors, some still in their suits, others having shed them or perhaps never worn one in the first place, opting for simpler protection or none at all, talking in hushed tones, their faces etched with fatigue. The air here is heavy with the smell of ink lamp oil and an underlying current of anxiety. You find an empty spot at a communal table, or perhaps wait for a clerk to call your name. You take out your small notebook, the pages damp from the sweat in your pocket and the charcoal pencil. A clerk slides a sheet of paper towards you. A reporting form, or perhaps just indicates a specific ledger page. Now comes the transfer. Patient, male adult. Merchant, you read from your notes. Location, address. Symptoms, high fever, difficulty breathing, large bubo in groin. Prognosis, grave. You add the date, your name or number. The clerk dips their quill in ink and copies it painstakingly into the large ledger. Each entry is a life or a potential life lost, reduced to a few lines of text in a massive book. It feels clinical cold, utterly insufficient to capture the agony you just witnessed, the terror in the wife's eyes. This ledger, this act of systematic documentation, was a mainstream historical fact of urban life during the Black Death and subsequent plague outbreaks. Cities quickly realized they needed to track the spread, not just for medical reasons, which were often flawed anyway, but for administrative and logistical ones. Where were the dead? Who would collect them? Which houses needed to be sealed? How many people were left? These ledgers, many of which still exist in archives today, are chillingly precise records of demographic catastrophe, showing spikes in mortality that tell the story of the plague year by year, week by week. They are the dry statistics born from countless individual tragedies. You watch the clerk write their face impassive. They see names and addresses all day. They are just as exposed, just as weary. They don't ask you about the patient's suffering or the family's despair. They just need the data. Once your report is entered, the process isn't finished. Your entry isn't just a record, it's an action. That address you just reported, particularly with a grave prognosis or confirmation of buboes, will be flagged. This is what triggers the city's most drastic measure: isolation. The clerk might make a note in the ledger or pass the information to another official. Orders are dispatched. A team, usually consisting of city guards, perhaps a carpenter or two, is sent to the address you just left. Their mission: seal the house. Imagine their arrival shortly after you've gone. The terrified family still reeling from your visit, and the grim reality of the disease now faces this new horror. The guards announce the city's decree: the house is quarantined for 40 days. 40 giorni in Italian, from which we get the word quarantine. 40 days. A period perhaps derived from religious significance, like the 40 days Christ spent in the desert, or perhaps just a length of time that seemed long enough for the disease to run its course, for the sick to die, and the potentially infected to either sicken or recover. The guards nail shut the doors and windows from the outside. They might post a permanent guard outside day and night. They paint that red cross or other marker on the door, a universal sign of plague, of sickness, of isolation. A quirky or fringe tidbit is that in some places, guards were instructed to sprinkle vinegar on the letters or reports coming out of quarantine areas, believing the strong smell would purify the communication and kill any plague miasma clinging to the paper. It was a charmingly futile effort against microscopic bacteria, but it highlights the desperate, often symbolic actions people took based on their misunderstanding of transmission. Imagine the smell of vinegar perpetually clinging to official documents, a bureaucratic hazard of the era. Inside the sealed house, the reality is terrifying. The family is trapped. If others fall sick, there is often no help. Food becomes scarce unless the city manages to organize deliveries, which are often irregular, inadequate, or simply pilfered by the guards. Water can be a problem. Waste disposal is a nightmare. The sick suffer and die without proper care. The healthy are trapped with the dying, and the dead breathing the same air, exposed to the same fleas. Escape attempts, if discovered, are met with severe punishment, often death. You know this. Every time you report an address, you are effectively signing the warrant for that house's isolation. It's a necessary evil. Proponents would argue the only way to contain the spread, to prevent the healthy parts of the city from being overwhelmed. But you also see the faces of the families you leave behind, and you know the likely outcome of their forced confinement. Historians still argue whether the harsh, often brutal isolation measures implemented by cities during the plague were truly effective in stemming the tide of the epidemic, or if they primarily served to concentrate the infected, increase suffering, and accelerate death within quarantined households. Did they save the city by sacrificing families, or did they just add another layer of horror to an already desperate situation without significantly altering the overall course of the disease? It's a difficult question, balancing public health goals with individual human rights and the very limited understanding of disease transmission at the time. The documents you help create contribute to the historical record that historians pore over centuries later, trying to find the answer. You sign your name at the bottom of the reporting sheet or nod to the clerk that you are finished. The act is done. The fate of the merchant and his family is sealed both by the disease and by the city's protocol, initiated by your visit and your report. You stand up from the table, the movement stiff. Other doctors are waiting. The clerks are still writing. The guard at the door is still watching. The air in the office feels stifling, a microcosm of the city's suffocating fear. You are a cog in this machine, a link in the chain that connects sickness in a dark room to a red cross on a door and an entry in a massive ledger. There might be other administrative tasks. Collecting your meager pay, perhaps, though money seems increasingly abstract in the face of the sheer scale of death. Or receiving instructions on where to go next. The city government, in its desperation, tries to manage the chaos. They might assign you to a specific district or give you a list of addresses to check. Some doctors like yourself might be employed directly by the city. Others might be from physician guilds volunteering or conscripted. Some might be charlatans hoping to profit from desperation. It's a mix. The documentation you provide doesn't just lead to isolation, it informs other grim logistics. The death rate documented in the ledger dictates the frequency of the death carts, the need for mass graves outside the city walls, the dwindling number of grave diggers and buriers who themselves fall victim to the disease at alarming rates. It dictates emergency decrees on everything from handling the dead to trying to control the swarms of rats and fleas, whose role in transmission is completely unknown to you and everyone else. You retrieve your small notebook, tucking it back into your pocket, the place feeling warm and damp. It contains the raw data, the personal observations, the little details you might not have included in the official report. The look in the wife's eyes, the precise shade of the bubo, the specific poultice being used. This is the hidden notebook aspect, the informal record that captures more than the dry statistics of the ledger. It's your personal chronicle of the apocalypse unfolding around you. Leaving the office is like stepping out of one pressure cooker into another, albeit larger one. The street still feels empty, haunted. You pull the mask slightly away from your face for a moment, trying to catch a less herbal-scented breath. But the air outside is still thick with the general miasma of the city. Smoke from bonfires lit to purify the air. The smell of sewage, the faint, unmistakable undertone of decay that seems to permeate everything these days. Your suit feels heavier now, coated in the grime of the city, the sweat of your exertion, and the lingering psychological weight of your last visit. Your role as documentarian and trigger of isolation is complete for this case. Your notes are recorded, the wheels of the city's response are turning. Now you must prepare for the next step, perhaps collecting supplies, or heading to another district, or simply trying to find a moment of respite before the cycle begins again. The city is a map of sickness, and your job is to traverse it, to witness, to record, and to activate the protocols of desperation. Your hidden notebook tucked away is a silent witness to the official record being built elsewhere, a personal tally within the city's public accounting of death. You step back out onto the street from the reporting office, the heavy door closing, with a thud behind you. The sound echoes slightly in the still quiet street. The air feels different now, perhaps just your perception, but there's a subtle shift, a lessening of the crushing weight that seemed to press down on the city just weeks or even days ago. The pace of reports at the office has slowed. The clerks aren't quite so frantic. The piles of forms aren't quite so high. It's a tentative, fragile change, easily misinterpreted, but it's there. The wave of death isn't breaking, not yet, but perhaps, just perhaps, it's beginning to lose a little of its terrifying momentum. You walk towards your temporary lodgings, or perhaps towards a place where you might wash and change clothes, if such a luxury is available or even safe. The sight of fewer red crosses being painted, fewer death carts rumbling past gives you a cautious flicker of hope, a feeling you haven't allowed yourself in months. Months. The plague year has felt like an eternity. You've seen things that will be forever seared into your memory. Faces contorted in agony, families weeping over dead children, the eerie silence of once bustling markets. You've breathed air thick with the smell of sickness and fear, and you've felt the clammy touch of death countless times, even through your leather gloves. But now you see signs of life tentatively reasserting itself. A shopkeeper lifts a shutter, peering cautiously out. A few more people are on the streets, though still keeping their distance from one another, their faces often covered with cloths or handkerchiefs. The sound of a hammer building something other than a coffin or a barrier carries faintly on the air. The city, ravaged and scarred, is stirring. You have survived. Many you knew, colleagues, friends, neighbors, have not. The priest who comforted the dying, the baker whose bread you ate, the city official who hired you, gone. Your survival feels like a mix of luck, careful if often misguided precautions, and perhaps just resilience. Your strange suit and your herbal poultices might have helped, or perhaps you simply weren't chosen by the invisible force that swept through the population. A quirky or fringe tidbit here is that some accounts mention plague doctors receiving exorbitant salaries or promises of riches for their dangerous work, only to find the city coffers empty or the promises broken if they survived. Others simply perished before they could collect. Stunden. Your own experience might fall somewhere in between. Payment, erratic danger, constant. As the city slowly recovers or at least stabilizes, your role changes again. The endless procession of house calls slows to a trickle. The reporting office is less a hub of emergency response and more a place of grim accounting. The great ledgers you help fill become less a daily tool for action and more a historical record of catastrophe. What happens to you now? Do you go back to a different kind of practice, treating coughs and broken bones instead of buboes and fever? Do you carry the psychological scars with you, unable to forget the horrors you witnessed? Do people welcome you, or do they shrink away, associating you forever with the time of death? Historians still argue whether the plague doctor profession truly disappeared after the Black Death, or if the individuals who took on the role during outbreaks simply reverted to being regular physicians, surgeons, or even unqualified healers when the immediate crisis passed. The image of the beak doctor is so strongly linked to the plague itself that it's hard to imagine the person inside the suit having a normal life afterward. But they were just people trying to do a job, however grim. Your personal notebook, the one you kept tucked away damp with sweat filled with your charcoal scribbles, now takes on a different significance. It's not just a quick reference for the next report. It's a personal chronicle. It holds the details the official ledger doesn't, the name of the child who sang a lullaby to their dying mother, the strange rash you saw on one patient that seemed different, the fear you felt when you saw a flea jump onto your gloved hand. It's your subjective experience of the objective horror recorded in the city's archives. Think about that notebook. Maybe it's kept tucked away in a chest rarely looked at. Maybe it's lost in the chaos of post-plague life. Maybe if you continued some form of medical practice, you occasionally refer to it trying to make sense of what you saw, hoping it might help you understand disease better in the future, even if your understanding of contagion remains miles off. Remember how you sprinkled vinegar on documents, charming but useless against bacteria. Your notes reflect that era's blend of observation and misunderstanding. Centuries pass. The great ledgers, those immense books filled page after page with names and dates and causes of death, often simply listed as plague, are preserved in dusty city archives. They are dry statistical records, but they are invaluable to historians. They show the sheer scale of the mortality. They reveal which districts were hit hardest. They show the demographic impact, who died when they died. This systematic record-keeping of births, marriages, and deaths by urban authorities and parishes, while significantly impacted and often overwhelmed by the plague, became a mainstream historical fact and a foundation for early demographic studies and public health understanding, eventually leading to more sophisticated statistical analysis centuries later. Shiwonin. The very act of trying to count the dead, initiated out of necessity during crises like the plague, laid groundwork for future population studies and epidemiology. These ledgers tell the story of the plague from the city's perspective, a tally of loss. But what about the individual human experience? That's where notes like yours, if they survive, come in. Imagine a historian hundreds of years from now poring over the official ledger. They see March 14th, 1348, John Smith Merchant, address prognosis grave, a data point. Then imagine they stumble upon a hidden collection of papers, maybe found in a church crypt or the attic of an old guild hall, and among them a small water-stained notebook with charcoal writing. They decipher your notes for John Smith, merchant, male, bubo groin size of pigeon egg purple, fever high, wife distraught asking about herbs, house has small dog. Suddenly, John Smith isn't just a line in a ledger. He's a man with a family living in a specific house with specific symptoms. The wife's despair, the presence of a pet, a potential vector unknown to you, the detailed description of the bubo. These are the things that bring the past to life, that capture the human reality of the pandemic beyond the cold statistics. These hidden notebooks, the personal journals, letters, medical observations, even accounting books that happen to mention plague deaths or precautions, provide the texture, the sensory details, the emotional context that the official records often lack. They are the unofficial history, the view from the ground level, showing the fear, the desperation, the strange remedies tried, like that crocodile dung sunscreen we heard about earlier. Seriously, who thought of that? The small acts of kindness and the pervasive sense of doom. They show that even in the face of overwhelming, incomprehensible death, people were still people. They worried about their families. They tried whatever they could to survive. They observed the world around them, and some, like you, tried to make sense of it, however imperfectly, through their notes. The lasting impact of the plague was immense, far beyond the immediate death toll. It reshaped societies. It caused massive labor shortages, giving ordinary workers more leverage and contributing to the decline of feudalism. It led to social unrest. It spurred changes in architecture and urban planning, though slowly. It profoundly affected religious belief and art. It also importantly forced cities to confront public health issues, leading to rudimentary quarantine measures, attempts at sanitation, often ineffective, and the development of official record-keeping systems that would become more sophisticated over time. Your efforts documenting the sick and the dead, contributing to those ledgers, were a small but crucial part of this larger historical process. You were a witness, a functionary, a survivor, hopefully, and the notes you kept, the observations you jotted down in the heat of the moment, potentially offer a glimpse into the raw reality of the most terrifying public health crisis the world had ever known, a reality often smoothed over by the dry ink of official histories. Your story, the story of the plague doctor and their notes, is a reminder that history isn't just about dates and numbers in ledgers. It's about people living through unimaginable events, trying to understand, trying to survive, and leaving behind fragments of their experience, sometimes hidden away in a small, sweat-stained notebook that can centuries later help us remember what it was truly like. Now the sounds of the city fade. The images of the plague-ridden streets, the dark, sick rooms, the grim reporting office begin to recede. Your thoughts turn away from the dust of the archives and the faint scent of vinegar on old paper. Your journey through this dark chapter of history is coming to a close. The work of the plague doctor is done. The ledgers are filled. The notebooks are closed. It is time to leave the past behind and ease gently into the quiet of the present moment. Now dim the lights even lower if you can. Let your body sink deeper into your bed or chair. Feel the soft hum of the fan, if you have one, a gentle, soothing presence. The history we've explored tonight was heavy, full of hardship and fear, but it is firmly in the past now. You are here safe and warm in your own time and place. Let the images of dusty ledgers and shadowed streets fade completely from your mind. The voices of the past are growing quiet now, whispering goodbye. There is nothing more to worry about, nothing more to see or hear from that time. Just the feeling of comfort, the slow, steady rhythm of your own breath, the soft sounds of your room. Allow yourself to drift calmly and peacefully. Sleep is waiting, a quiet, dark, and restful space. Just let go.